Letters written by the dead, delivered to 221B. Welcome to Silent Case Files. I am your host, Pendleton. Share your corner of the world, drop a comment, and tell me where you're listening from. I treasure every message you leave. Now into the case. It was a November that pressed its damp fingers upon London, dimming lamp glass and temper alike, when the first of the letters came to Baker Street. Dr. Watson, who had returned from an early call upon a patient in Marylebone, found the fire newly stirred, the breakfast things cleared, and Mr. Sherlock Holmes, seated cross-legged upon the rug like some ascetic before an altar, his long fingers steepled and his eyes half closed in that peculiar inward gaze his friend knew too well. Watson's entrance did not rouse him. Only when the doctor laid aside his hat and stick and was halfway to the mantel to warm his hands, did Holmes breathe, "You are a kind man, Watson, but a poor conspirator. If you mean to surprise me, you must not creak upon the third stair." "Holmes," said Watson with a laugh, "you grow insufferable when you have not eaten." He caught himself then, for the tray truly was gone, and Mrs. Hudson, a woman as regular as a metronome, had cleared it. "Ah, you have eaten." "Merely observed," Holmes murmured, but the line of his mouth told Watson that something already possessed his mind. Upon the table lay a single envelope, propped against the blue china tobacco jar like a calling card that had overstepped its propriety. It was of thick, old-fashioned vellum, with a faint bluish cast, and bore upon its flap the ghost of a seal. No wax remained, only that clear, oval impression, as if some emblem had once pressed there and then vanished. "What have we here?" Watson asked, taking it up. "The beginning of a grave absurdity," Holmes replied. "Pray examine it." Watson turned the envelope over. It was addressed, in a firm and legible hand, to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. There was no direction given but 221B, Baker Street. No stamp, no postmark, no hand of a messenger had disturbed the dust outside. The knocker had not sounded, yet the thing sat upon their table as if it had grown there. "This was not here when I left," Watson said. "Nor when I rose," Holmes returned. "Mrs. Hudson swears equally. You perceive the difficulty." Watson drew out the sheet within, a single fold of the same vellum, faintly scented with something like peat smoke, mixed with a sharper tang he could not place. The writing ran across it in an unembellished military script, with the economy of a legisman. "Mr. Holmes, this is to inform you that the Bevington jewels will be removed tonight without trespass, without key, and without force. Inspector Lestrade will be misled by appearances. You may prevent a miscarriage of justice if you attend. The innocent party is the one most at hand, Charles Percival Addington, on 12th of November. Watson felt the blood drain from his face. "Addington!" he exclaimed. "Colonel Charles Percival Addington of Her Majesty's—" "Late of Her Majesty's," Holmes said softly. 2 years late to be exact. Drowned off the coast of Madeira when the Euterpe foundered. You attended the inquest, if memory serves." "I gave evidence about the state of the man's lungs," Watson said slowly. "There was no question as to the Colonel's death. Good heavens, Holmes, if this is a jest—" Holmes opened one eye. "If it is a jest, it is beautifully sustained. The hand is Addington's to a nicety." He indicated a small oblique habit in the cross of the T and the slightly retroussé tail of the G. "I have preserved a note of his in my index. It pertains to a matter in '88. The congruence is striking." Watson looked again at the date, 12th of November, that very day. Outside, the fog idled past their panes in slow wrinkles. But how did it come here? That, my dear fellow, is the lesser challenge. A nimble lad, a compliant housemaid, a coin, and a moment's inattention are a sufficient combination for most domestic mysteries. No, what piques me is its content. To remove jewels without trespass, without key, and without force. That is a trinity devised to pluck at my vanity. Watson, who knew too well the chords upon which Holmes's vanity would sing, set the letter down. The Bevingtons, Sir Lionel Bevington of Grosvenor Square? He is a person of note. In Parliament, a trifle tedious, Holmes conceded, but not without integrity. I have noted his name in the agony column on occasion. Here a faint smile, though always in connection with charitable funds and never with scandal. The jewels in question are his lady's, a necklace of river pearls, a brooch of cameos, and a parure of emeralds of pleasing colour, but in different provenance, Spanish, I suspect, with a Venetian mount. He has foolishly exhibited them of late. Vanity again meets vanity. Holmes, said Watson, if this letter be genuine, there is no if about the prediction. Either the removal occurs or it does not. The more pertinent unknown is its author. Watson was about to retort that authors who had been 2 years at the bottom of the Atlantic had scant habit of writing letters, when the knocker sounded sharply below, and Mrs. Hudson, after a murmured exchange on the stair, ushered in a gentleman whose very posture radiated authority in distress. Sir Lionel Bevington, whom Watson had last seen at a charitable banquet, entered with the air of a man whose life, hitherto symmetrical, had been tilted by some unseen hand. His hair, which he wore in the old style brushed back from a high brow, was neatly groomed. His gloves were spotless, but at his temples there glimmered the dew of agitation. Behind him came a lady with a veil thickly drawn, and the maid who escorted her twisted a handkerchief in nervous fingers. "Mr. Holmes," Sir Lionel began. "You must forgive this abrupt intrusion. I am told you accept only matters that engage your particular talents. I fear I bring one." Holmes rose and bowed with grave courtesy. "Pray be seated, Sir Lionel. The intrusion is well timed." "Timed?" The statesman's eyes darted to the letter on the table, the only disarranged thing in the room. "My wife's jewels, Mr. Holmes. I am ashamed to put such a petty thing into words when the Empire demands our attention. Yet Lady Bevington insists." The veiled lady's gloved hand lifted, a tremor in it. "They are not petty to me," she said, and her voice, though restrained, carried an anguish that arrested both men. "A family inheritance and—" "I beg you, Mr. Holmes, I have received letters from—" She faltered. "From the dead," Holmes supplied, and his eyes, which had been almost languid, hardened to 2 points of light. Her head gave a violent start. "You know?" Holmes gestured to the vellum envelope. "The dead are busy scribes this morning." Sir Lionel Bevington stared. "Then it is a plot after all. I said as much to Lestrade, but the man only shrugged and told me to keep my doors locked." "Inspector Lestrade is not a poet," Holmes said without malice. "But he is not a fool either. He will have his hands full by midnight." He turned to Lady Bevington. "You have received similar communications?" She nodded, and drew from her reticule 2 envelopes, twins to the one on the table. "They were upon my escritoire yesterday morning when I came down," she said. "No one admits to placing them there. The house is full of servants. We are to have a supper party tonight. And yet, Mr. Holmes, the first was only a few lines telling me not to wear the emeralds after dusk. The second said the same, and that I should entrust them to a friend, the one most at hand." "The phrase recurs," Holmes murmured. He did not touch the letters yet. "And the signature?" The lady hesitated. "Charles Percival Addington," she whispered. Sir Lionel's mouth hardened. "Ridiculous! The man is dead." "Which is what makes it so effective," Holmes returned. "A threatening letter signed John Smith invites the fire. One signed by a ghost invites the chapel." He rose and stood at the window, where the fog smeared the daylight to a dull pewter, and the street below murmured with distant wheels. "Tell me, Sir Lionel, how many persons know the arrangement of your jewel case?" "My wife, myself, her maid, and our butler, Jameson," Sir Lionel said promptly. "And perhaps our jeweller, Mr. Lecky, who examined the clasp last week. Any others who might possess a plan of your house, or access without intrusion?" "Our house agent, Wetherall," Sir Lionel replied. "And the window cleaner, though heaven knows he is never punctual." Holmes half smiled. The heavens are seldom punctual. It is their irritating habit to lean on eternity. "Doctor," he added, and his tone shifted from reverie to command so subtly that Watson felt it in his spine. "Observe the paper." Watson, who had been admiring the calm with which Lady Bevington carried her distress, bent at once to the envelopes. He felt the texture with his fingertips. "Old vellum," he said. "A bluish cast, perhaps a watermarked batch?" "Hold it to the light," Holmes urged. Watson did so and saw, faintly, a watermark. R. Dunfield and Son, Kendal, with a small figure of a leaping fish. "The Kendal Mill," Holmes said, "ceased its watermark of the leaping trout in '89 when Mr. Dunfield's son married and took the business south. Since then, their mark is a thistle in a ring. These sheets are older stock, kept back, hoarded perhaps by a man with habits of neatness. Notice, too, the edge, hand-cut with a short stroke at the corners, English, not French." Watson also observed upon the flap a crescent of salt, as if a wet finger had lain there and dried, leaving a white arc, and a smell in the paper that was not London. He named it at last. Coal smoke, yes, but something else, peat. "And iodine?" "Sea wrack and preserves," Holmes said, his nostril lifting. "One could find the same odour in a seaside lodging-house where Scottish winter coal meets the ocean pantry. Addington wrote often from garrison towns and packet boats. His luggage would have smelled so. Our correspondent wishes us to believe in Addington, intimately, olfactorily, graphologically. Either he is Addington or a most faithful student of his habits." Sir Lionel folded his arms. "If the letters are meant to frighten us, what then?" "Then they will succeed," Holmes said coolly, "unless we refuse to stand at the spot where we are invited to be frightened." "Yet the invitation contains a sharper barb, without trespass, without key, without force. That is an engineer's boast. We must discover what is meant, and we must do so before midnight." Lady Bevington's voice trembled. "You will come to the house?" "I should sooner go to the theatre," Holmes said, with a sparing smile. "But I am not wholly without charity. Watson and I will attend this evening, and before that I shall pay a brief call upon Inspector Lestrade." "Lestrade?" Sir Lionel repeated. "Because—" Holmes tapped the letter with one long finger. "Our anonymous friend has thoughtfully supplied us not only with a prediction, but with the inspector's misstep. Lestrade will be inclined to arrest the one most at hand. That is almost too plain. The person who carries the jewel case, or whose duty touches it at the moment of loss, will be the convenient scapegoat. Convenience is the mother of official error." Lady Bevington made an involuntary movement toward the maid who stood by the door, a pale girl with anxious eyes and a cap too large for her small head. The girl blanched further. Holmes saw it all, and his voice became very gentle. "No harm will come to the innocent while I have breath, Lady Bevington. Pray do not let your apprehension betray the very person you would protect." Sir Lionel began to speak again, but Holmes lifted his hand. "One question more, Sir Lionel. Why now? Why right now from the abyss? What event has occurred within your household within the past fortnight that differs from your usual habits?" Sir Lionel frowned. "My wife's cousin has come to stay," he said after a moment's thought. Mr. Edgar Vale, a literary man, he is compiling some sort of monograph on early Stuart track culture or some equally soporific subject. He occupies the morning room. Holmes's eyes flickered in amusement. Literary men are usually harmless. Their weapons are footnotes. Yet everything has its uses. Very good. Watson, your hat. Lady Bevington, Sir Lionel, place the jewels as you intended, lock them as you intended, invite whom you intended, make no show of fear, only— He paused. Do not entrust anything to the one most at hand, however the opportunity recommends itself. But the letters, Lady Bevington breathed. Shall I burn them? Holmes's mouth curved slightly. By no means. Keep them. They may yet burn us more profitably in the light they shed. When the Bevingtons had gone and the fog, pressing at the stairwell, had followed them out as if to eavesdrop upon their carriage wheels, Watson turned to his friend. Holmes, you will admit there is something uncanny in this, he said. A dead man's hand. Ghosts, Holmes said, taking up his violin from the corner where it lay, are the last refuge of the unimaginative criminal. He drew the bow once, and a low string hummed like a distant wire in a storm. Yet I confess myself entertained by the manner of his haunting. Without trespass, without key, without force, 3 negations to frame a positive. I can think of 2, perhaps 3 mechanisms by which such a theft may be accomplished. All depend upon vanity and routine. Both are faithful servants in large houses. And Lestrade will be where I most desire him, in error. Holmes set the violin aside and reached for his chemical corner. Before we go to Grosvenor Square, I shall determine one small matter. Mrs. Hudson keeps her salt in a pot by the scullery window. The crescent on that flap, yes, my dear chap, I noted your glance, was not ordinary table salt. It had the coherence of sea salt and the faintest speck of iron rust. Let us see whether our ghost travels with a sailor's pockets or merely knows his apothecary. Watson watched as Holmes scraped the tiniest grains from the envelope with the back of a penknife and dropped them into a shallow dish, where he added a drop of reagent that he had prepared for a separate case involving forged coins. The compound frothed, then settled, leaving a yellowish tinge. Holmes's eyes brightened. Sea salt adulterated by pickle brine, he pronounced. It is a trifle, but trifles are the air I breathe. Come, Watson, we will catch Lestrade at the yard before he does something meritorious. And this evening, he added with a thin smile that made Watson both uneasy and curiously excited, we shall dine with jewels that do not know they are about to go walking. They had reached the door when there came a sharper rap from below. 2 brisk strokes, followed by an impatient third. Mrs. Hudson's tread, the gentle murmur, and then into the room burst Inspector Lestrade himself, his hat askew, his expression one of irritation and, Watson thought, uneasy relief. Mr. Holmes, Lestrade snapped, if you are at leisure to leave off fiddling and lend us your eyes, you might spare an innocent man a night in cells. I've arrested Jameson, the Bevingtons' butler. Holmes's gaze flicked once to Watson and back to Lestrade. Already? My dear Inspector, you are prompt. Prompt? Lestrade barked. A pocket full of petty cash, a key that fits the plate cupboard, a motive, he's in debt, and a story that, well, I don't like it. But it will do for now. The house is in an uproar, and, blast it, there's letters in it, Holmes. Letters from a party who's dead these 2 years, if you please. Holmes took up his Inverness cape with unhurried hands. Then it is as I suspected, he said. Come, Watson, Inspector, kindly keep your mind as open as your mouth. If you must arrest someone before the event, choose anyone but the one most at hand. Before the event? Lestrade repeated blankly. Holmes's eyes danced for the first time that morning. Before the theft, Inspector, it is always refreshing to be in advance of one's misfortunes. He swept past the astonished officer, and in another moment the three men were descending into the thick London noon, the fog laying its clammy palm upon their cheeks as if some unseen presence, amused and watchful, were guiding them toward Grosvenor Square. They went first by cab to the yard, for Lestrade, having blurted his arrest, could not forbear to justify it on the way with a string of small facts that, like bricks, made a tolerable wall until one asked for mortar. Jameson, he said, had been found with a handful of sovereigns he could not readily account for. A key on his ring fitted the plate cupboard, not, Lestrade admitted, the jewel safe. A tradesman swore he had pressed the butler for payment 2 days past, and had been told to look to Saturday, which was this very day. It was a familiar music to Holmes, who listened with polite inattention, his eyes on the greying world beyond the carriage glass. At the yard, the butler was produced for a brief confrontation. He was a middle-sized man in his late 40s, with the deference of his station stamped into his attitude and an injured rectitude in his eyes. Lestrade pushed him forward with the air of a showman. "You told Sir Lionel you'd set the supper silver yourself," the inspector snapped. "Why meddle if not to gain occasion?" "It is my duty to see it laid out, sir," Jameson returned quietly. "Mrs. Holt, our housekeeper, will tell you as much. The money is from my brother in Leith. His letter came yesterday." He hesitated. "If you please, Mr. Holmes, if you will look to the letter-box at Grosvenor Square, you will see the post has had strange ways these 2 mornings." Holmes's head moved a fraction. "Strange ways?" "The letters in the salver have been wet, sir," Jameson said, "as if they had passed through damp fingers." Holmes's glance quickened, but he only nodded, and with that allowed the man to be led away. "Keep him comfortable, Inspector," he murmured. "Nothing stiffens innocence like an empty stomach." "Comfortable," Lestrade scoffed. "He'll be comfortable enough if he confesses." "Comfort is a poor inducement to confession," Holmes said, and in another quarter hour they were again rattling through the fog toward Grosvenor Square. The Bevington house showed all the signs of a great household in alarm. Servants moved in 2s and 3s with lowered voices. A footman's livery was misbuttoned. Someone had dropped a feather duster on the first landing, and no one dared retrieve it. Sir Lionel met them at the door with an effort at composure that made his hands fidget. Lady Bevington, pale but steady, sat in the morning-room. Beside her, a thin young man in spectacles, with a scholarly pallor and a tie too carefully arranged, rose and bowed. This was Mr. Edgar Vale, the cousin. "You will forgive me if I do not quit my papers," Vale said, indicating a pile of pamphlets and quartos linked by ribbons. "I am in the midst of a collation, and dare not disarrange a leaf." "A collation that smells faintly of vinegar," Holmes observed as if idly. "You use a preservative?" "Vinegar water to relax fragile bindings," Vale returned, colouring slightly. "A common expedient." Holmes said nothing to this, but he crossed to the escritoire where Lady Bevington's letters lay, and bent with a brief sniff. "Sea and pickle," Watson thought, returning. He examined the morning-room grate, the coal hod, the scuttle. "Scotch coal," he pronounced softly, then passed to the bell-pulls and the sash. The window looked upon the square. There was a narrow well between the house and the railings, and below, at basement level, a tradesman's door with a glass fanlight. "Where do you place your post when the servant brings the salver?" Holmes asked. "Here," Lady Bevington said, on the small table by the door. Holmes knelt and ran a finger along the skirting board. His nail came away with a smear of the same fine white that had ringed the vellum's flap. He touched it to his tongue. "Sea salt and something of brine," he told Watson in a voice that did not carry, and then straightened. "Sir Lionel, show me, if you please, the jewel case." They went to the inner dressing-room of Lady Bevington's apartments, where the safe stood in the wall behind a panel. It was of a modern pattern, its key a stout instrument with a warded end. Lestrade, who had followed with determination to detect a trick, made a point of taking the key himself from the housekeeper, trying it, and locking and unlocking the safe with a clank of triumph. "The emeralds are within," he said, puffing his chest. "They'll not go walking under my nose, Mr. Holmes." Holmes regarded the safe without admiration. "No mechanism is unassailable to its master's habits," he said. He examined the panel edges, the hinges, the floor before the safe, unmarked save for the faintest track leading not outward but inward, as of something dragged within the threshold and removed again. He looked to the ceiling, to the cornice and the gas bracket. He even lifted the Turkey carpet to reveal the boards beneath, which were sound. When he spoke, it was of nothing to do with safes. "Your bell system, Sir Lionel, does it communicate to the servants' hall only, or is there a separate wire to the tradesman's entrance?" "There is a speaking tube to the servants' hall," Sir Lionel said, "and a bell to the trades' door." Holmes's nostril raised. "And a letter box?" "In the front door," Sir Lionel replied. "I confess," he looked uneasy, "that like many we have told the servants to leave it unlatched in the mornings. The milkman and the newsman are irregular, and Mrs. Holt will not have the door answered every 10 minutes. "That economizes labour and multiplies opportunity," Holmes observed mildly. "You keep no dogs?" "Lady Bevington will not have them within," Sir Lionel said. "They fret her." Holmes stooped to the safe again, not to test it, but to touch, with a gloved finger he had drawn on from his pocket, the topmost ridge of the inner frame. He showed Watson the barest trace of grease upon the kid. "Lord," he said almost cheerfully. "I think we approach the heart of the puzzle," Lestrade bristled. "Grease? What of it? The maid dusts with whatever rag comes to hand." "The maid dusts," Holmes returned. "But the person who left this is not a maid. He is a man who smears what he cannot otherwise persuade to pass a tight aperture. You perceive, Watson, the boast of without trespass, without key, and without force points to an avenue that is none of those things and yet all three, a channel accepted by the house, needing no turn of steel, and yet compelling, if one knows how to compel." Watson thought of chimneys and flues. Holmes shook his head at his expression. "Too sooty and too public," he murmured, "and the jewels would not bear it. No, let us have the servants." They were ranged in the lower hall. Mrs. Holt, the housekeeper, square, capable, affronted by disorder. 2 housemaids, one of them the pale girl from the morning visit, a cook with reddened hands, 2 footmen with faces too carefully blank, the coachman summoned from the mews, and the scullery maid, a raw-boned Scottish slip with a shawl, who smelled strongly of coal and pickles. There was also the porter at the tradesman's entrance, whose business it was to receive deliveries between dawn and 10. Holmes's questions were not theatrical. They were patient and creeping, moving like water to find every smallest crack. Who had seen the letters upon the morning-room table? Who had dusted the skirting? Who saw the post delivered? The porter admitted with reluctance that more than once of late the post had dropped, not with the honest clatter of metal upon wood, but with a wet slap, as of something damp, pushed through and drawn back. The scullery maid, when pressed, confessed that she had, that morning and the one before, been sent to the tradesman's door by Mrs. Holt to take in the milk and newspapers, and had found the inner latch already lifted. "Who lifts it?" Holmes asked, not unkindly. She reddened to the roots of her hair. I dinna ken, sir. It just is. And you, my girl, he said to the pale maid Watson had marked earlier. Your name? Annie, sir, she whispered. You carried the salver? Yes, sir. Did you note the letters to Lady Bevington? Yes, sir, She swallowed. I wiped them. There was salt. Holmes's eyes softened. You did right to wipe, Annie. It is a good maid who keeps her lady's fingers clean. Tell me, who stands nearest to your mistress when she sits at the escritoire? I do, sir, Annie said, a tear starting. That's why they look at me. They will look elsewhere before I am done, Holmes said, and sent them away. In the hush that followed, he turned to Sir Lionel. You have invited a supper party, he said. Name your guests. Sir Lionel recited half a dozen names of consequence and 2 or 3 of leisure. Among them was Mr. Lecky, the jeweller, who had exhibited a taste for music and had, at Sir Lionel's urging, agreed to play a quadrille between courses. Also Mr. Wetherall, the house agent, who had made himself useful during recent repairs, and a Colonel Seagrave, lately returned from abroad. Mr. Vale remains in the house? Holmes asked. Of course, Lady Bevington said quickly, with the loyalty of blood. He has his work. Holmes allowed the faintest smile to touch his mouth. Naturally. He turned to Lestrade. Inspector, set a plain clothes man at the trades door. If any person, guest or servant, shows a habitual kindness toward that latch, I should like his name. Place another in the street by the railings. He should watch the well and the fanlight. No one must tamper with the bell or the box. The box? Lestrade echoed. The letterbox, Holmes said. I shall want the postman's hour to the minute also. He drew from his pocket the Bevington letter, and with the back of his knife scraped the last of its crystalline arc into a vial. Have someone fetch me from your stores a length of stout twine and a handful of small corksy, such as the kitchen uses. I will borrow a fish slice from Mrs. Holt by and by. A fish slice, Lestrade exploded. Lard, salt, corks, a slice, and a narrow way, Holmes said, all serenity. We shall give our ghost his medium. They went back upstairs where Mr. Vale was feigning indifference to events by adjusting ribbons and making notes in a careful hand. Holmes glanced at the pamphlets. Early Stuart tracts, he said, a jurisprudence delight. They are difficult to come by in good condition, Vale said primly. I have lately had the luck to acquire a lot from a certain Kendall library. Kendall? Holmes repeated, as if the word were of no consequence. How fortunate! He took up one thin quarto, held it to the light, and nodded as if satisfied of its fibres. Pray continue your labour, Mr. Vale. You will find that truth, like a rare tract, resents a clumsy hand. He set the pamphlet down and addressed Sir Lionel in a tone that had become brisk. We will dine with you, as arranged. Let nothing be altered but this. When the guests are arrived and the household settled, you will ask your lady to write a short note to her cousin and to place it in the morning-room post for the footman to carry to the library. I will tell you the hour. When she does so, the emeralds should be in the safe, and the key with Lestrade. If our correspondent keeps his promise, we shall have his hand in ours before midnight. Lady Bevington shivered faintly. Must we be the bait? Holmes's reply held the courtliness that made people forgive his arrogance. No bait takes who is not willing to be caught, Lady Bevington. But I promise you this, your jewels will not go walking far. The road they are to travel is a short one, and I propose to be waiting halfway. The afternoon ebbed into a grey that seemed woven from soot and fog, a fabric drawn taut over the square and all its shaded apprehensions. Holmes made his dispositions with the precision of a staff officer and the lightness of a conjurer. From Lestrade's man came the twine and corks. From Mrs. Holt, after a hard-fought parley in which her notions of propriety were married to Holmes's of necessity, he obtained a long, flat fish slice with a thin, tapering end, polished to a near mirror by years of service under soles of turbot. He handled it with affectionate distaste, as though it were a dull violin bow. In the morning-room he knelt before the front door's inner plate, where the letterbox's flap shone from daily use. The brass mouth gaped upon a narrow throat. One could see the steel spring that pressed the flap home and the wooden chute beyond leading to the salver's accustomed table. Holmes looped 3 small corks at precise intervals along a line of twine, tested the drag against the flap's spring, and then let the line fall within that throat, the end retained in his hand. He fixed the other end through a discreet eyelet he screwed into the skirting behind the escritoire. The corks nestled like pale buoys, invisible from the hall unless one lay upon the mat. He gave the twine the gentlest twitch. The 3rd cork vanished as the spring tensed. He smiled without warmth. "You observe," he murmured, "a conduit the house itself defends. No trespass if one's hand remains without. No key required, no violence unless one counts persuasion. If I were a thief of a certain bent, I should cultivate letter-boxes as others do gardens." "You think he will pull, not push," I said. "He will do what he has rehearsed," Holmes returned. "One does not promise the removal of jewels upon a first attempt." He turned to the bell rope that communicated with the tradesman's door, and ran fingers along the braid, attentive as a musician to a string's whisper. "A separate wire," he said, half to himself, and followed its run to the lower passages, where, with Lestrade in tow, he drew off the cover of the bell-board and peered at the small brass tongues that tremble and ring by the servants' ears. There, too, he set a thread, barely kissing the tongue of the tradesman's bell, and hitched it to a 2nd cork he secreted behind a coal scuttle. "A hare's whisker will do," he said. "I only require to know if a vibration travels first from the door or the letter slit." He returned upstairs with the fish slice under his arm. In Lady Bevington's dressing-room he shut himself in with me and examined again the safe's framed mouth. The panel was honest, the hinges good. He slid out his card case and, selecting a visiting card of the thinnest Bristol, inserted it a hair's breadth between door and jamb near the upper inner corner. The card took a reluctant bite. He withdrew it and showed me the smirch of fat upon its edge. "Lard will creep where light cannot," he said. He wrapped the fish slice's blade in a kid glove to dull it, anointed the top inch with the daintiest touch of oil from his pocket ampule, and, aligning it parallel to the inner lip, eased it into the same crack, until I could not believe metal could thin itself so. He did not force, he did not pry. He breathed as if playing the bow arm of a long phrase, inching, then stilled, as a surgeon does when the life beneath his hand announces itself in a tremor. "There," he breathed, "kiss the tray." His wrist turned no more than the turning of a key from 5 to 7 minutes on a watch dial, and withdrew with a whisper. Upon the slice's very edge rode a minute thread, caught and dragged from within. He pinched it free and showed me the end, a wisp of black wool with a crescent of grease, and, adhering, a pearl powder mote. "It is the tray's nap," he said with satisfaction. "Our man has practised, perhaps last night, when he judged the house asleep." He looked vacantly past me a moment, mind ranging. To hook a tray one must first have a hook. To hook it at leisure one must know at what hour the room is empty and the safe full. Our anonymous friend is a student of routine. Lestrade, who had watched the demonstration with amazement rapidly converting to pique, burst out, It's trickery. A flat of steel and a lot of fancy. How do you propose to draw out a parure of emeralds as if they were a haddock?" "By not drawing them at all," Holmes said mildly. "He will not take the tray, he will tilt it, perhaps only enough to spill a single case into a prepared cradle. Consider the inner geometry: a velvet bed, a shallow lip, a gentlest lift in the corner, and an oval case will slide like a bar of soap if something soft receives it from below." He looked again at the frame, measuring with his eyes. "The fish slice will not do when the hour strikes. Our friend has his own instrument. Thinner, curved, perhaps of spring steel with a forked end. He will have tested it upon lard and salt. Salt to bite flesh and preserve, lard to teach it patience." He smiled a little. "We shall teach it a different lesson." By 6 o'clock the house had resumed a ceremonial composure that masked a tremor, like a soldier at parade after a night of marching. Lamps were lit behind clean chimneys. The fog pressed the windows with dingy palms. Guests came, men of weight and whisker, ladies with eyes for one another's gowns and for Lady Bevington's steadiness. Mr. Lecky the jeweller had the quick, bright gaze of his trade. Wetherall the house agent had the blandness of a man who sells you your own threshold. Colonel Seagrave wore his travel in his boots and his reserve in his jaw. Mr. Vale hovered between erudition and anxiety, fondling his ribbons as if they could bind the day to his liking. Holmes moved like a shadow on the periphery, attentive to no one and to everyone. The footman's slight deviation when setting a dish, the gloved hand that lingered within an instant of the morning-room door, the twitch of a bell-tongue behind a panel far below, where Lestrade's man stood watch. He had arranged with Sir Lionel a signal when Lady Bevington had shown the emeralds in the drawing-room for an instant to satisfy some harmless inquiry. They were to be restored to their case and replaced in the safe without ostentation. From that moment Holmes counted his minutes. At 8:30 he touched my sleeve. "Now," he said softly. In the pause between courses, when the house breathes and the servants run, he guided Lady Bevington to the morning-room with a bow that would have satisfied a duchess. "If you please," he murmured. "A note to Mr. Vale as we discussed. Something harmless. An inquiry whether his collation requires the assistance of Mr. Lecky's opinion on bindings, and that he might step to the library when he is free. Place it in the post salver as you habitually do. We will do nothing out of habit, but the act itself." Her hand trembled only slightly as she wrote. She rose, set the fold upon the little tray by the door, and looked to Holmes. He inclined his head. "Courage repels malice," he said. "Return to your guests." She went. He remained as we were, in the half-light of that small room, the fogged street beyond a darker grey. He took up the line he had set between skirting and letterbox and pinched it so lightly that it would transmit a whisper to his fingers. We stood thus 5 minutes. The house murmured, glasses chimed. From far below, faint as a moth, the tongue of the tradesman's bell trembled. The cork near the scuttle stirred. Holmes's eyes narrowed, not at the bell, but at the letter flap. A breath of colder air touched my cheek, scarcely more than a thought. The flap lifted an inch and settled again. The line in Holmes's fingers whispered. "Gently," he said under his breath, and without moving from the spot, he gave the line one slow inch of slack. It paid out, then went taut of itself, as if answered by a hand on the other side. The second cork slid, kissed the spring, and was held. Some unseen suitor courted the house's mouth. From the dressing-room upstairs came, thin as memory, the tiniest sound, not a ring, not a crack, but the noise a velvet tray might make when a weight shifts against it. Holmes's pupils dilated as if in darkness. He put his free hand to the pocket where the fish slice lay, then let it fall. He would not interfere with the unknown instrument. Another breath, the line tugged, the letter flap spring clicked and recovered. On the salver, a ghost of movement, the note to Mr. Vale shivered as if affronted. "Almost," Holmes whispered. "Come to me, my pretty, a hair more and—" The tradesman's bell tongue quivered again, harder, a nervous echo. From the well outside came the whisper of a shoe on the stone, the sound swallowed at once by fog. Holmes's line tightened against his fingers so abruptly that it bit the skin. He smiled, set his heel upon the spare coil he had laid at his feet, and stamped. The line stopped as if cut. The flap half opened, caught, worried, and then stilled. Lestrade's boots thundered in the passage. His plainclothes man burst in behind him, breathless. "A hand at the slit, sir. Something like a wire or a slice," the man panted. "He felt me coming. He's gone to the area." Holmes had already moved. "Not to the area," he said, "but to the railings. He has a tether outside to draw what he dares not pull within." He lifted the salver with 2 fingers. From beneath the note to Mr. Vale, he drew a leather oval scarcely larger than a man's palm, lined, padded, with 2 narrow slits and a faint smear of lard upon its belly. "A cradle," he said softly. He offered it under our tray to catch a case at the safe. Then by the line through the letter slit, he plucked the arrested twine. He would have had his prize slide to his waiting hand. Lestrade looked wild. "Where is he?" Holmes's head turned not toward the trade's door now, but to the dark window and the iron spearheads beyond. "At the rail, Inspector, unless he is a fool. Your man at the well, off with him round to the front. Watson, down the steps with me. Gently, no heroics. We will pluck our correspondent where he writes." We went together, Holmes a pace before me, Lestrade behind with his man, the air in the area well tasting of soot and damp iron. The front steps fell away to the right. To the left, the railings stood like a black harp, strung with fog. Holmes moved to the outer gate and knelt where the stone curb met the iron standard. His fingers found what his eye had already taken, a small cleat screwed low upon the inside of the rail, such as a gardener might use to secure a tie. Round it ran a twine, taut as a fiddle string and humming faintly with the life of our own arrested line within. "Hold, Watson," he said quietly, and set my hand to the twine while he loosened the hitch with 2 rapid turns. The line leapt in my grasp like a startled thing. Holmes let it run an inch, then checked it. From the darkness beyond the railings there was the smallest answering tug, human and impatient. "Not yet," he murmured, and paying out the merest slack, he shifted his weight, poised like a man who means to strike a match upon a gale. "Lestrade, send your man round by the mews and take the far corner. If our friend means to fly, he will choose distance over close quarters." Lestrade, to do him credit, did not argue, but was gone with a muttered order. The line in my hand warmed as if a pulse had entered it. Holmes's other hand slid to the gate catch. He lifted it without a sound, opened a breadth sufficient for a man's shoulder, and then with a sudden fierce pull, wrenched the line from its hidden partner and flung himself outward through the rail, his long arms scything into the fog. There was a gasp, a curse half swallowed, the scrape of leather on iron. Holmes's fingers closed and heave. For an instant the fog held a shape, a hat brim, the hint of a scarf drawn high, a gloved wrist that flashed a length of spring steel, catching what light there was, and then both figures reeled together against the spikes. I was at Holmes's shoulder. Between us we had the fellow pinned by the forearm. He was quick and cunning. He bent with eel-like suppleness, letting the iron take his weight while he wrung his captured wrist in a motion that would have broken a man less practised. Holmes changed grips as a fencer changes guard, and, with a twist that seemed to draw strength from his very shoulder blade, turned the spring steel aside. The instrument fell with a sound like a blade drawn across glass. Our captive struck once, blindly, and would have been away like a wraith had not Lestrade's man, appearing from the mews with commendable timing, thrust a boot behind his ankle. The three of us came down among the area steps in an inelegant knot. I confess my breath was gone and my knee barked. The prisoner left me a stinging souvenir upon the cheekbone. It was done in a space of heartbeats. The fellow lay still, not stunned, but calculating, and then, with a suggestion of a shrug, he ceased to labour. Lestrade arrived, panting and profane. He bent, tore at the scarf, and brought away a half-mask of dark silk, such as a cyclist might favour against the wind. "Now then," Lestrade crowed, "we have you." His voice checked. The face thus disclosed was ordinary to the edge of invisibility, a narrow brow, a nose neither blunt nor sharp, the lineaments of London anonymity. There was an old scar at the jaw, neatly sewn, and the eyes were pale and attentive, as if their owner had set his vanity aside for work long ago. Holmes, kneeling, regarded him with an interest that was almost kindly. "A letterbox artist," he said. "You would have done better in Paris. London prefers its thieves to be noisy." The man returned Holmes's look without insolence and without fear. His gloved hand made the smallest movement, then went lax as Lestrade snapped on a cuff. "Name," the inspector barked. "Call me Charles," said the other, and smiled. "It seems to answer." The insolence of that reply struck through me. I half rose in anger, and Holmes's hand fell, light but decisive, upon my sleeve. "Let him keep his little theatre, Watson," he murmured. "He will have scant opportunity for it in the cells." Lestrade's man found upon the prisoner a coil of line, a short, flattened hook of tempered steel with a forked end, a case of thin grease like a huntsman's dubbin, and a wallet with nothing but a tram ticket and a rectangle of old vellum from which, to my surprise, a portion had been cut. "Not unhandy," Holmes observed, taking the hook between finger and thumb. "You shape your instruments yourself." "I buy what suits," the fellow said. "Sometimes I amend." Holmes's nostrils dilated slightly. "And sometimes you scent your paper," he said. "Peat and brine. A romantic touch." The man said nothing. His gaze slid, not to me or Lestrade, but upward to the square of window that showed the morning room's glow, and, within it, the movement of a figure, Mr. Edgar Vale, crossing with a bundle of papers in his arms. The pale eyes flickered and were still. We brought our prisoner within by the area steps, for Holmes would have it that no proclamation be made at the front door. In the morning room, with the salver still upon the small table and the false cradle in Holmes's pocket, the fellow stood with careless composure between two officers and sniffed faintly, as if disappointed in the room's appointments. "You have been about this house more than once," Holmes said conversationally. "You know where the bell wires run and where the skirtings yield?" "If I had," the man returned, "I should never have come to the railings." "Just so," Holmes said. "You are the hand, not the map." Lestrade's excitement had taken the practical turn. "That will do," he snapped. "We'll have him to the yard and put the other matters together at our leisure. I'll see what Jameson says to a face put by the letters." "Jameson knows nothing of this fellow," Holmes said evenly. "Do not lose him among the commonplace, Inspector. He is not the butler's ruin, but another man's instrument." "And whose?" Lestrade demanded. Holmes's glance moved across the room, swift and bird-like, touching and leaving. The escritoire with its faint salt ring, the bell rope to the tradesman's door, the place where the line had kissed the skirting, the window and the railings silhouettes. When his eyes returned, they were bright. "Not yet," he said. "He will tell us in action what he withholds in words. There is more of the night before us." Lestrade muttered that he liked a clear statement better than a lantern in fog, but he gave the order, and the prisoner was led away. As he passed, the man turned his head an inch. "You will not keep your jewels," he said to the empty air, and his pale eyes were amused. When they were gone, the house seemed to take a long breath. Sir Lionel came in to us, dignity striving with rage. Lady Bevington followed, holding herself very upright, as women do when they are most afraid. Mr. Vale hovered a shade too close to hear well, a shade too far to be addressed. Mr. Lecky, having lent a violin to the impromptu quadrille, carried his bow like a conductor cheated of the second act. Holmes's tone became that of a servant of the house, quiet, deferential, relentless. "The jewels are within the safe?" "They are," said Lady Bevington, and the steadiness she summoned served for both of them. "Then we will close this room," Holmes said. "Sir Lionel, have Mr. Wetherall join us, discreetly. I should like a word with a man who understands passages." Wetherall, when he came, had the air of one dragged from the amiability of the drawing-room into a logic that did not please him. His face was pleasant to the point of vacancy. His hands, I observed, were very clean. "You have made alterations of late," Holmes began. "Speak to me of your bells and wires." Wetherall smiled with an air of patient condescension. "Old houses, Mr. Holmes, are like old clients. They like to be humoured. We have run a new bell to the tradesman's door, separated from the speaking tube, and cleaned the run of the letterbox chute. The servants complained of jamming. I flatter myself it is now as smooth as a banker's apology." "So smooth," Holmes said, mildly, "that a cork will travel like a swan." Wetherall blinked. "A cork?" "An engineer's metaphor," Holmes returned lazily. "You set no grills within the box throat?" "Grills?" Wetherall repeated, as if the word were a foreign coin. Holmes looked bored. "It is of no moment. One last thing. Who attends to the tradesman's door at dawn?" "The porter," Wetherall said. "Or the scullery maid when the porter is on his rounds." "Just so," Holmes said. "You are very obliging." He allowed the man to drift away. When the door had closed, I said, "You do not trust him." "I trust him to have done what he was asked," Holmes answered. "The question is by whom?" He stood a moment, head bent, listening not with his ears only, but with that inward faculty which in him made a silence speak. The attempt failed, and yet our anonymous friend foretold success with the calm of a man who knows his own hand. He will not abandon his theology upon a single disproof. He will write again, if only to keep faith with his ghost. As if summoned by the irony, there came a soft knock. Annie, the maid, slipped in, her eyes large. "If you please, sir, there's another letter." Holmes took it from her on the instant, not looking at the girl, but at the vellum, the cut, the ghosted seal. He held it to the lamp. "Kendall," he said. His nostril twitched. "And our sea pantry again." He broke it, not at the flap, but with a thumb along the fold, so that the crescent of salt remained to be read later. The words were few, written in that same military exactness. "Mr. Holmes, you interrupt a duty to the dead. The pledge stands. The emeralds cannot be kept by bolts. The innocent party is at your elbow. Charles Percival Addington, 9:30. Holmes glanced at the clock on the mantel. It wanted 5 minutes of the named time. "At my elbow," he murmured, and the faintest ironical smile touched his mouth. "I wonder which elbow he means." He turned. We were a little knot, Lady Bevington, white but unyielding, Sir Lionel, rigid with indignation and fear, Mr. Lecky, whose bright eyes travelled not to the safe, but to the letter, as if the penwork interested him. And a pace behind my right shoulder, Mr. Edgar Vale, his papers hugged close as if they were a shield. Holmes's gaze flicked once to the scullery smell that lingered about the door where Annie had stood. "Inspector," he said, as Lestrade re-entered, summoned by my message to the hall. "Let the house continue to its end, as if nothing had occurred. Place a man in Lady Bevington's dressing-room, unseen behind the screen, one who can keep his breath. When the clock strikes the half-hour, watch not the safe, but the floor between the safe and the threshold." "The floor?" Lestrade said blankly. "The short road," Holmes returned. "Our correspondent keeps his promises. We must be where his faith expects us least." He moved to the door and listened a moment to the murmurous house. "Come, Watson, we will attend above. I'm curious to learn what stands at my elbow when the minute is full." We mounted softly to Lady Bevington's dressing-room, where the air held that careful stillness of a place where women keep their treasures and their poise. Holmes placed me a little behind the angle of the door, the constable flattened himself in shadow behind a chinoiserie screen, and Lestrade, for once obedient, held back his breathing as if it were contraband. Holmes himself stood not before the safe, but midway between it and the threshold, as a man would stand at the inner elbow of a corridor. The clock on the mantel ticked with a prim self-importance, like a governess counting stitchwork. At the downstairs hour, a faint stir rose through the house, the way a large creature adjusts itself upon a settle. Holmes's head turned. He was listening for a speech the rest of us could not hear. The minute hand crept, and at the very instant the clock sighed its half, I felt more than saw a change on the floor. The turkey carpet, deep and well-napped, answered to something beneath it with the slightest crawling motion, a ripple no larger than a cat's breath running from the skirting toward the safe. Holmes's hand dropped. He touched the carpet with a flat palm, then lifted a corner at the threshold with 2 fingers, quick and delicate as a kleptomaniac's. "There," he breathed. Under the carpet lay a slip of oilskin, thin as parchment, upon which had been fixed 3 small cork rollers. It moved soundlessly, its belly glistening with the faintest smear of grease. At its forward edge, 2 narrow slits had been cut, a cradle's mouth waiting for an oval case to be coaxed within reach. The little sledge advanced no more than a finger's breadth, halted, and withdrew an inch, with the precise shiver of a thing pulled by an answering hand far away. Holmes did not snatch at it. He laid the tip of his forefinger upon the oilskin, held it as one holds the vein of a skittish horse, and with his other hand followed the course of a hair-fine line that ran from the sledge's tail into the skirting board itself. "Gut," he murmured. "Good violin string. Our friend has a musical soul." Lestrade could hold himself no longer. "But how, in the devil's name?" Holmes's eyes were bright and distant. "By the short road, Inspector, not by the railings now that we have frightened his letterbox, but by his second string. Watch." A tremor passed up through the gut into the little sledge. It made as if to glide toward the safe again. Holmes, with a gentle, inexorable pressure, kept it where it was, and with his free hand slipped from his pocket the worn visiting card he had used before. He slid it into the safe's lip as one might offer a morsel. Then, with such nicety as I have seen him use only with a lancet or a Stradivarius, he let the card tilt the tray within. By the breadth of a breath, the sledge answered like a trout to a fly, nosing forward that precise inch to be beneath the fall. Then Holmes let the tray settle again, and the sledge, balked by his finger, waited like a dog at heel. "There," he said softly, "enough proof, not enough plunder." He released the gut. At once it yielded, drawing the baitless cradle back under the carpet, swift as a shadow to its hiding. Holmes's hand moved to the skirting. With a penknife, he drew away a tiny square of wood no larger than my thumb's nail. Behind it, in the dark, gleamed a little wheel, and upon it a turn of gut. He sniffed, smiled, and touched his fingers together. There was the odour of lard and faintly that same tang of preserved sea. "Where does it run?" I whispered. "Down," he said, and his voice had in it the contentment of a problem that has given up the first of its bones. "Down the bell channel." Hush. From the servants' country below there came the most delicate of chimes, not a full ring, but the note of a tongue that has been made to tremble without speech. Holmes's whisker at the tradesman's bell had told him the direction earlier. Now the very timbre of the wood told him the place. "Bring your man off the screen," he said to Lestrade, "and station him on the landing. No one passes but at your word. Watson, come." We moved like conspirators. In the passage, Holmes's experiments had left him the advantage of knowledge. He laid his finger along the plaster where the bell wires ran, turned at the little elbow of the corridor, and took the back stair 3 steps at a stride. The servants' hall received us with its honest smells of coal, starch, and stewing bones. At the bellboard, with its array of modest names, morning room, library, trades, Holmes's hare's whisker still trembled. He lifted the board as a man lifts a lid upon a nest, and there, cunningly fitted into the shallow void behind, we found the apparatus, a small capstan cut from a cheese box, its axle a meat skewer, its flanges greased, and upon it a turn of the same fine gut. A simple lever fixed to the tongue of the tradesman's bell transferred the slightest jerk into a steady draw. The gut ran from the capstan into a drilled hole that vanished upward in the thickness of the wall. Holmes looked upon the contrivance with that impersonal admiration he affords to any mechanism that has the grace of an idea. "It is almost elegant," he said, "almost because it forgets people. That is where crimes betray themselves." Lestrade, who was recovering his breath in sarcasm, grunted. "People? Who sets this capstan in motion?" Holmes returned. "Not a ghost, a hand here, or, if the lever be weighted and released, someone to lift and let fall. We will learn whose. But first, we will teach the capstan manners." He took from his pocket the little leather cradle we had found beneath the morning-room salver, and, after a moment's reflection, removed from it a thread that matched the gut in suppleness, if not in strength. From his case he produced a tiny pellet of soft wax, such as children use to fix seals in play. With this he fastened to the cradle's mouth a silvered button, taken, to my astonishment, from the inner hem of his own cuff. "A bell for a cat," I said, unable to keep back a low laugh. "A bell for our trout," he corrected. "If he draws again, the button will kiss wood wherever the cradle rests. We shall be able to hear his way with our fingers, if our ears fail." He set the cradle upon the capstan's tail with a conjurer's delicacy, so that, if the gut moved again, the thing would ascend obediently as before, and our little bell would whisper its tale upon the floor above. We had scarce done when the scullery door opened, and the raw-boned maid, shawl awry, came in with a pail. She started to find us at her bell-board, and her cheeks flamed. Holmes addressed her as if we were country cousins by a hearth. "Good evening, my lass." "Who was on the tradesman's door between 9:30?" "Me, sir," she said, in a voice that did not know where to lay its accent. "Porter? He went to fetch his tobacco. Mrs. Holt," she said, "I was to see to the milk cares and to the letters?" Holmes asked, so gently that the girl could not take fright. "I just looked if there were any," she confessed. "Sometimes there's a bit of damp, sir, in the slot, and I wipe it." Holmes's eyes were kind. "You are a good house, and good houses make good servants. Go along, and keep your hands as clean as your heart." When she had gone, Lestrade said behind his teeth, "You make pets of them, and I must lock them." "Lock no one tonight," Holmes said. "You would jail the honest and let the clever sit in the library. Come, we must show Lady Bevington a trick in self-preservation." We returned by the back way. In the dressing-room, Holmes knelt once more at the skirting and with his head bent, listened by fingertip. Then he rose and went to the safe. "Lady Bevington," he said, with a gravity that had in it a kind of homage, "I will ask you to humour me. We shall not deny our visitor the sensation he seeks. You will permit me to place within the case not your emeralds, but a shape of them." She hesitated only as one hesitates at cold water. "Do it, Mr. Holmes." From his pocket he produced a morocco etui of his own, oval, not unlike in size to the Bevington case. Into it he set, with a tenderness that made me smile in spite of the tension, 3 glass marbles wrapped in velvet and a paperweight cut and polished to a green that would deceive any eye save a jeweller's. He snapped it shut, weighed it upon his palm, and nodded. "Enough." He showed me then a further refinement, a thread of black silk, finer than hair, which he knotted through the hinge of the sham case and paid out along the tray to the lip, where he let it fall so it lay kissing the frame. "Our trout will take his fly," he said, "and we will take his line." He replaced the sham where the emeralds had lain, and, with all the ceremony of his nature put by, closed the safe and gave the key to Lestrade, who pocketed it as if it were a medal. "Do not stir from your posts," he said to us in a stage whisper, "and if so much as a flea walks this floor, I shall clap irons on it." "Do," Holmes returned, amused. "Meanwhile, I must borrow Mr. Vale for 5 minutes." "Vale?" Sir Lionel repeated, startled. "Only for his scholarship," Holmes said, and the smile he gave the lady reassured her more than his words. "I require the loan of a pamphlet." We found Mr. Edgar Vale in the morning-room with his quartos. He started at our entry, and then made his expression the mask of polite inquiry. Holmes lifted without asking the thin tract he had examined earlier. "This Kendal stock is admirable," he said, turning the leaf to find the watermark. "Would you indulge me in the loan of a sheet? Not of this treasure, heaven forfend, but of any one of your sacrificial duplicates." "My sacrificial," Vale began, and then, with the air of a man who despairs of the lay understanding of scholarship, produced from a side drawer a sheaf of damaged sheets. Holmes selected one with the leaping trout mark and, with an apology that had the quality of a caress, tore from it a strip no wider than his finger. He held it to the lamp. The fibres glowed. "Thank you," he said. "You have a smell of vinegar about you, Mr. Vale." "For the bindings," Vale returned, colouring, "as I told you." "Indeed," Holmes said. "Go on with your collation, sir. I will not trouble you further. We will answer with a collation of our own." In the passage he spoke very low. "The hand at the rail is a hand only. The mind sits within. He has chosen his ghost with taste. He scents his letters with a soldier's port, and wraps them in Kendal. He has given us our phrase, 'at your elbow,' because he knows the house's elbows better than its owner. He thinks in channels and angles and pulls. He thinks, too, in phrases. Watson, you stood with Mr. Vale at your elbow when that letter named the hour. You suspect him?" "I observe him," Holmes said, "and I will give him rope. If I be wrong, the rope will merely dangle. If I be right, it will draw." He turned his head slightly, the rapt look upon him again. "Hark!" From above, so faint that it might have been memory again, there came the whisper of our little bell, the softest kiss of silver upon wood. Holmes's eyes flashed. "He draws," he said. "Now we shall see whether our fish prefers glass to emeralds, and where he means to land his catch." Holmes did not run, he flowed. We took the back stair again, our feet learning the house as a blind man learns a room. In the dressing room, the black silk he had looped through the hinge lay slack along the tray's lip, quivering with a life that was not the room's. He put 2 fingers to it lightly, as one tests a pulse. It answered with a small, steady tug. "Let it go," he breathed. "He thinks he has you." He stooped, palm to carpet. And there, so faint I should have sworn it a trick of my nerves, came the whisper of our silvered button against the board, the kiss he had promised. 1, then 2, then again, a soft mapping under our feet. "The passage of a mouse," Lestrade muttered, scorn doing duty for wonder. "The trace of a habit," Holmes returned. "Hush, count them." We counted with our bones. The kisses moved from the safe to the threshold. There they paused, the smallest hesitation, as if the little cradle scented the edge of its world. Then they turned left, not right, along the skirting where the bell wire ran within plaster. Holmes's head turned also, his whole being now a compass needle brought to its true north. "Down to the landing," he whispered. "Then along the elbow of the corridor there is a quirk there. I marked it earlier, and from there—" "Morning room," I said, struck by the inevitability that systems take when once seen. "By the bell channel." "By the elbow," he corrected, and his mouth made that spare smile he has when a mind besides his own has done him the courtesy of thinking. At my elbow, indeed. He did not wait to watch the cradle complete its route. It would do so whether praised or chivied. We were already upon the stairs. In the servants' hall he laid his finger to the board. The hare's whisker he had fixed to the trades. Bell trembled faintly, in time with the button above. The capstan behind, with its cheese-box flanges, made the softest murmur, the sound a beetle makes in a hollow. He did not touch it. "Up," he said, and we went. The morning room, when we reached it, held the civil war of a well-bred house, the lamps tidy, the tables obedient, and beneath this a tautness like wire. The little salver still sat upon its table by the door, innocent as bread. Holmes crossed not to it but to the opposite wall where the wainscot rose knee-high before the escritoire. He knelt and laid his palm there. After a moment he moved his hand a hand's breadth along and nodded. "Here," he said, "the elbow turns inside the corner. He has bored his aperture where the skirting's shadow hides the saw." Lestrade was at his shoulder now, scowling like a sailor at a fog bank. "Will he show his hand?" "He need not," Holmes said. "He will draw the cradle into a pocket within and retrieve it later, when the house sleeps. But tonight," and he lifted one finger, "we have given him a reason to come early. We have told him his hour." From the passage beyond, the murmurs of dinner rose and fell. A footman passed, his discreet speed a trained art. Mr. Lecky's violin sang a phrase and stopped, as if the bow had remembered it was out of place. I could picture, in that neighbouring brightness, Mr. Vale receiving Lady Bevington's note with the scholarly frown that is half pride, half worry, and at Holmes's prompting earlier, excusing himself soon after to offer Mr. Lecky an opinion on bindings in the library. Holmes left Lestrade kneeling with his ear to the wainscot, and drew me into the little ante-room between morning-room and library, where the coal scuttle and a landing-chair made a pretext for our shadow. There he stood, seeming to attend to nothing and listening to everything. The kisses of the button, the minute rub of gut upon an unseen lip, the slight airy sound a man makes when he thinks himself alone and is not. The library door opened with a studied ease. Mr. Edgar Vale came out not at once but by degrees, his head first, attentive as a bird's, then his narrow shoulders carrying a thin smile composed for no audience in particular. He had no pamphlet now, his hands were empty, but the right lay too flat against his thigh, and the first and second fingers were stained, not with ink alone, but with something paler, unconvincingly washed. He moved to the morning-room door and peered in as if searching for a misplaced thought. Holmes's voice, when it came, was as mild as milk. "Mr. Vale, if your collation can spare you another moment, I should be grateful for your sense of touch." Vale started, and then made his face the face of a man accustoming himself to trifles. "I am at your service, Mr. Holmes." Holmes stood away from the wainscot, inviting room. "You have the fingers of your calling," he observed. "Delicate, patient. Feel here." It was the most innocent of requests. Vale knelt, put his hand where Holmes's had lain, precisely where the tiny pocket must open within the skirting, and in that instant Holmes caught his wrist as a steel trap catches a stoat. There was no violence, there was certainty. His other hand plucked at the cuff. A length of fine gut showed and was gone again as Vale jerked back. For one heartbeat we were a tableau. Holmes, serene as a surgeon demonstrating an ulnar, Vale pale with a flush burning under the skin, Lestrade's face appearing around the door, with astonishment beginning its ungentlemanly stride. Then the house itself made the next move. From within the wainscot came the most distinct kiss yet, our silvered button striking the little pocket. The gut at Vale's cuff twitched. Holmes's voice, when he spoke, had lost its softness. It was the voice he keeps for hired minds that swagger. "Draw if you dare," he said evenly, "and you bring up a toy from my box, not your own. Draw not, and the sham lies to betray you later. Either way, Mr. Vale, you have your lesson." Vale did not try to wrench free. He did not bluster. He let his eyes move to Holmes's, then to me, then to Lestrade. He understood his audience and chose his tone accordingly. "You will make a spectacle of me," he said, very low, "in front of my cousin's friends." Holmes released his wrist with a courtesy that stung more than a shake. "If you had cared for your cousin's friends, you would have made no spectres for their house," he returned. "Stand up, sir, and save what dignity remains to you." Lestrade, red with the relief that follows bafflement, stepped in with his cuffs already open. "Enough of the parson's phrases. I arrest you, Edgar Vale, for conspiracy to steal—" "Wait," Holmes said, sharper. "We will arrest our hand when we have our mind." He turned his head slightly. "Mr. Wetherall, you are punctual." The house agent had been behind the library door, his blandness drawn tight as a purse. He had come at the first whisper of raised voices, or perhaps at the conclusion of an appointment that had begun when Vale excused himself. He halted at sight of Lestrade's cuffs and smiled the smile of a man who thinks to step aside and be forgotten. "Do come in, Mr. Wetherall," Holmes invited. "You have been kind to the Bevingtons' passages. Do not neglect them now. You placed the capstan, I think, and you smoothed the letterbox channel. Your hand is in the timbers, not at the railings." Wetherall's eyes flickered, a fault in a calm surface. "I don't know what you mean," he said, with the correctness of a man addressing a trades dispute. "You do," Holmes returned almost kindly. "The workmanship below is too neat for Mr. Vale's temperament. Scholars are painstaking in ink and slovenly with wood. You, sir, are painstaking with wood. You bored this elbow when you ran the separate bell. You cut this pocket to the thread's breadth. You made a second mouth within the house." Wetherall's hands, which I had marked as very clean, opened and shut once, as if measuring a plane. "If there were such a mouth," he said, "anyone might use it." And anyone might scent a letter with peat and pickle, Holmes said lightly. Yet it is Mr. Vale who has Kendall paper by the ream, Mr. Vale who keeps vinegar and a seaweed press in his room, Mr. Vale who writes in a hand that imitates a soldier's more closely than a clerk's, Mr. Vale who stood at my friend's elbow when the second letter named the hour, Mr. Vale whose right sleeve smells of lard, not from Mrs. Holt's kitchen, but from a little tin in his desk. He looked from one to the other, and his voice altered, gained weight. Between the two of you, you built a theology and a trap. Mr. Wetherall made the procession for the miracle, wires, wheels, and tidy mouths. Mr. Vale found the scripture and the incense, Addington's hand and a dead man's scent. Between you, you promised that jewels walk, that locks are vain, and that the innocent, the maid nearest the escritoire, the butler at hand, would take the blame. Vale's composure fluttered and steadied. I have nothing to say, he murmured. Wetherall's blandness hardened into something more honest and less creditable. I sold no such lie, he snapped. If a client's house admits a draft, it is my trade to show it where to go. Just so, Holmes said. And if a cousin's pride admits a slight... He let the sentence hang. It was Lady Bevington's voice that finished it, low and level from the doorway. We had not heard her approach. Fear makes lighter feet than coquetry. A slight? She repeated. What slight is there between cousins? Vale's jaw tightened. The colour that had come and gone now rose and stayed, a flush of old grievance. A cousin is a poor relation, he said softly. He reads your books and is told his opinions are clever until your husband smiles. He eats your soup and is told the kitchen is generous. He lives by his hands and is told the hands are fine, like a woman's. His mouth twisted. Charles Addington wrote me a note once when I sent him a pamphlet. He's dead. And yet his hand binds more doors in this house than kinship does. Holmes inclined his head a fraction. Acknowledgement without sympathy. And so you chose a dead man to give you weight. You studied his hand and stole his smell. You set letters to walk made of vellum and brine, and promised a theft that would for a night give you the god's vantage. Wetherall gave you passages. Our letterbox adept gave you a hand to try them. You kept your own white. When the case was seized from the safe, you would recover it here, at this pocket, by a hook within the library wainscot, and walk out before dawn with nothing to mark you but scholarship. Lestrade made a sound like a cork drawn too roughly. Enough, he said thickly. Vale, Wetherall, I'll have you both in charge. Gladly, Holmes said, but take one thing with you as you go. He reached into the wainscot pocket and drew out, not the emeralds, but his Morocco oval with its glass and weighted green. He set it upon the table with the delicacy of a replacement heart. Your theology failed, Mr. Vale, only because it forgot that the living think too. The emeralds remain within. We have your line, and we have your hour. The house seemed to exhale. Lady Bevington did not move. Her eyes were on her cousin with a steadiness that had no anger in it, only a knowledge of distance. Holmes glanced at the mantel clock. It lacks 10 of 10, he said. Inspector, let your men take these gentlemen by the back way. We will answer the guests with music. Mr. Lecky will oblige. And Watson, he added, turning to me with a sudden lightness that in him presages a darker turn to come, do not sleep yet. Our correspondent has kept half his word. He has yet to keep the other half, and he will not leave off while his pride has breath. The drawing-room received us as if nothing had been torn from its seams. That is the genius of great houses, to mask upheaval with upholstery. Mr. Lecky, summoned by Lady Bevington's brave insistence that the quadrille continue, had made his violin sing for a few grateful minutes, and now stood with his instrument lowered, the small, bright eyes of his profession darting from face to face. Colonel Seagrave spoke with a cool urbanity to a dowager over a map-book. Wetherall and Vale were already gone by the back way, escorted between two quiet men. Sir Lionel, with an iron self-command, murmured something to his nearest neighbour that made her laugh and settle, as a hen reassured about the fox. I felt Holmes's touch upon my sleeve, and knew the respite was a skin, not a cure. He moved among them with a manner almost idle, as if he sought nothing. In truth, his gaze worked like a probe upon a wound. He examined, not grossly, the way a man held his glass or a lady her fan. He noted a smear of rouge upon a cuff, a fleck of whitish dust upon a lapel, an odour of glue about a glove, not wholly to be explained by the library's bindings. When he came opposite Mr. Lecky, he paused half a beat too long for accident. "You play agreeably, sir," said Holmes with that languid praise which is a scalpel in velvet. Lecky bowed, the neat joints of his fingers fitted to the bow like teeth to a key. "It is a relief from emeralds, Mr. Holmes," he returned. "They weary the eye if you dwell upon them." "Yet one must dwell to judge," Holmes murmured. "A faint fog on the surface, a whisper in the light. These are not weariness, but information." Lecky's lips flattened in the ghost of amusement. "You speak as one who has glances to sell. I have only my glass." He touched the pocket where a jeweller's loupe might lie, the movement of habit more than boasting, and the cuff he moved showed a dusting of pink no parlour would own. Holmes's nostril flared by the breadth of a breath. "Rouge," he said softly. "Or Tripoli?" "Rouge," Lecky returned. "Tripoli is coarser. One does not scratch an emerald even by mention." Holmes let him go with a little courtly inclination. He went to Lady Bevington and asked, in a tone that had the quality to soothe a horse, "For the comfort of your guests, madam, would you show the parure once more? Not to parade, but to occupy their thoughts." "I will stand by you." She obeyed without question. The case came and was opened. The green lay in its velvet bed like a cooled flame. I have not the jeweller's eye, but I can say what occurred. Holmes stood so that the chandelier made a pool upon the central stone. Then, with careless fingers and a word of apology for a physician's habit of touching, he breathed upon the gem. A film went and came again. He lowered his head. I saw that what returned upon that breath was not the clean dismissal of true crystal, but a faint clinging such as glass will show when the air is damp. Lady Bevington, who could not know what he read, saw only that he honoured her jewels. Lecky, who could, shifted his "Wait," and a minute line appeared and smoothed itself again between his brows. Holmes closed the case and gave it to Sir Lionel to restore. He was about to move when the house proposed its next falsehood. A cry came from the passage, the startled cry of an honest girl struck by a thing she does not understand. Annie stood there, white as salt, her hands lifted as if they had burned her. In the crook of her apron lay blasphemously bright a spray of green that any footman would name a fortune. Mrs. Holt, offended propriety made flesh, had the look of a woman who has expected this since noon and is both triumphant and wounded. "Found," she announced in a parched voice. "In the scullery pail, if you please. The Lord sees." Lestrade was there at once, grim with the patience of a man whom fate has twice tried to make ridiculous. He put his hand to the brooch. Holmes's hand touched his wrist. "If you please," he said, and took the spray with a gentleness that was, in that moment, the only kindness in the room toward the little maid. He did not breathe upon this. He tapped lightly with his nail, the facet's edge nearest the pin. It gave a note, delicate, a shade duller than the true, and where his nail met it, the finest powder came away upon his cuticle. He smelled it. "Glue," he said, not loud, but the word moved like a draught through the company. "Fresh!" Annie burst into crying. "Oh, sir, I never! I was to fetch the pails, and there it lay, as if it had grown there." "Peace, child," Holmes said. "Who sent you?" "Mrs. Holt bid me," she sobbed. "'Tis my place." Mrs. Holt drew herself up. "It is any good maid's place to keep clean. I'll not be made to answer for craft laid under my nose." "No," said Holmes, and his civility became thin enough to see the steel beneath. "You will answer for your nose only if it smells what is before it. Inspector, take the spray to the library table. We will presently prove whether it belongs to the parure or to a pocket." He turned, not to Lecky, who would have been the common man's quarry, but to Sir Lionel. When did Mr. Lecky last have the emeralds in his hand? Sir Lionel, who had borne himself nobly thus far, looked briefly old. "Last week," he said. "The clasp on the necklace was loose. I asked him to attend to it." "And you did not count your stones before and after," Holmes observed without reproof. "You trusted your tradesman. It is the habit of good houses." Lecky's colour had not changed. His gaze ran from the spray upon the table to the closed case as a musician's eye runs from the bow to the score. "You are pleased to suspect me," he said, an edge at last under his composure. "Yet if any guilt lie here, it lies in a conspiracy you have already unearthed. Mr. Wetherall and Mr. Vale contrived their innards. Why should they not have arranged their proofs?" "Because their proofs lack rouge," Holmes answered wearily. "And because they required your part, which you gave them with a professional exactness that does you credit as a craftsman if not as a man. You exchanged stones a week ago, Mr. Lecky, when you attended the clasp. You put paste where emeralds lay. Tonight you intended that when your allies' contrivance drew the case to their pocket and back again, the house should wake to find its jewels miraculously returned. Only for a portion, planted in a pail, to establish the maid's guilt, and the remainder to be discovered next week to be glass. Then would come damages and noise, and you would show a wounded man's face and lament that the criminal art of copying deceived you too. A double theft accomplished half by vanity and half by pamphlets. There was a murmur, quick and ugly. Even Colonel Seagrave, who had the soldier's dislike of scenes, stepped nearer. Lecky's answer, when it came, was the most dangerous thing about him. It was plausible. "Your wit outruns your proof," he said. "Try me, try the stones. Compare what lies in the case with this brooch in the pail. I welcome it." "We shall," Holmes said. "And while we do so, I will fulfill a promise made us earlier." He looked at me, and I understood. My hand went, not to any pocket I had made, but to the inner breast of my coat. There, where a man is most private, my fingers touched vellum. I had not put it there. I drew it out, and my heart gave the smallest leap. The envelope was of that same Kendall stock, the leaping trout like a ghost within. It had lain against my ribs as if to hear them. On the flap, the crescent salt glittered like frost. Holmes took it, smiling a thin, mirthless smile. "At my elbow," he said. "So literal a ghost deserves an answer." He broke it along the fold, as before, preserving the salt. The line within was as brief as a pistol shot. "Mr. Holmes, you are late by a week. You grasp a hand and a cord and mistake them for a mind. The jewels are removed. If you doubt it, ask Light. C.P. Addington." Holmes closed the paper with a motion of quiet triumph that surprised me. "Ask Light," he repeated. "I have asked it twice. It has answered once and refused once. Sir Lionel, by your leave." We went again to the library table, where Lestrade, with great solemnity, had set the brooch from the pail and the closed case. Holmes took the case first, opened it, and held the largest stone under the shaded lamp. He breathed upon it, and the film came and went too slowly. He turned it. At the girdle there were minute scratches that no wearer's vanity would have suffered. He set it down, took a second, and touched it with a point of steel drawn from his pocket. The point left a hair's whisper of a mark no true emerald would show. "Paste," he said, "all paste." Sir Lionel made a sound that men make only when a tendon tears or a dignity breaks. Lady Bevington's hand went to the back and bi chair and rested there, steadying the world. Holmes turned to the brooch from the pail with a tenderness almost cruel in its exactitude. He took his breath upon it, no clinging now, a quick, clear vanishing. He touched the girdle, no yielding. He tilted it under the lamplight, and I saw, as if I had never had eyes before, the way true green holds light like a thought held by a wise head, firmly and with facets of freedom. He nodded once. Real, recently unpinned, planted to play the last verse of our psalm. Lecky's mouth opened and shut. His gaze went somewhere beyond us, and I thought then that courage is a queer beast. He had it in his fingers, not in his heart. Lestrade did not wait for him to find it. "Charles Lecky," he said with grim satisfaction, "I arrest you." "Spare the ceremony," Holmes said, almost with pity. "The man writes better than he steals. The mind wanted theatre, the hand wanted certainty. You gave them both, and they ruined you between them." He turned to Lady Bevington. "Madame, do not mistake me. I have not conjured your stones back. They were gone before we came, but I can tell you where they will be before dawn." She drew herself up. "Where?" "In a valise that smells of vinegar," Holmes returned. "In the morning room is a sheaf of tracts, beneath them a tray, within it a tin. Under the tin, wrapped in vellum, your emeralds lie. Mr. Vale hid them once to gloat and to test your fear. Tonight, having failed his little miracle, he meant to bring them to terms with Mr. Lecky, and, if their craft had prospered, send them down the letterbox path and up again to his pocket by that elbow. We have cut one path and stopped the other. Pride, when balked, hoards. Inspector, your men will oblige." Lestrade went at a run that did his soul good. In 3 minutes he was back with a tin that had kept pickled something. In 5 more the vellum lay upon the table, its leaping trout accusing us all, and within it, dull and perfect as winter leaves, the stones themselves. There was a sound then, not a cheer. Great houses do not cheer, but a release, like a mast rope eased after strain. Lady Bevington's eyes closed for a single breath, and when they opened, they were clear. Holmes's face did not unbend. He looked again at the letter that had warmed my breast. "Our correspondent," he said softly, "keeps the scorn of the dead like a miser. He has not done with us because we have done with his mechanisms. He will write, if only to find a way to imagine himself clever again, and there is yet the promise about the innocent." Annie, poor child, had not understood any of our finer points. She had only known terror. She stood at the edge of the carpet, her apron empty now, her hands in it, twisting. Holmes lifted the brooch, the true one, from the table and placed it in Sir Lionel's hand. "The innocent," he said, with a glance that took in Annie and the household both, "has stood at our elbow all night and has been used like a broom. Let that be amended before she sleeps." Sir Lionel, who in spite of politics is a just man, turned and bowed to the girl as if she had been a guest. It did her far more good than coin could have done. Holmes gathered the vellum letters, including the one from my coat, and arranged them like a hand of cards. "You see, Watson," he murmured, "how vanity furnishes both scent and ink. I will answer him once, in kind, and we shall see whether a ghost can be made to keep silence when it is invited to show itself." Holmes did not at once surrender the house to relief. He kept Lestrade and Sir Lionel a little while longer in the library, going over the ground as a surgeon will examine the scar after the operation has succeeded, to be certain no thread is left within to fester. From Mr. Vale's small room there came, by the inspector's men, the expected evidences: a tin that had once held something pickled and now held lard faintly flavoured with sea-wrack, a packet of vellum with the Kendal fish, a little oval stamp cut in gutta percha that pressed upon soft wax and lifted swiftly while the wax was still warm, left only the ghost of a seal, no clay to betray it after. There were also sheets of practice hands, the soldier's script copied 100 times until its very faults had been mastered, an ungenerous resoluteness that in another man would have made a fine antiquary. Lecky, who had recovered some of the chill composure of his calling, was made to examine with Holmes the paste in the case and the true stones recovered from the vellum. He did not deny the exchange. He had the fatal candour of the technician cornered. He preferred to argue gradations of guilt. Lestrade had no ear for it. When the men were gone under charge, Sir Lionel and his lady thanked Holmes with a dignity that did them honour. Yet Holmes's face, in the last of the evening's lamplight, kept its sharpening intentness. "Take heed of 2 things only," he said quietly as we made our leave. "First, lock the morning-room letter-box. Let no servant, however good, humour its mouth until a smith has set a throat within. Second, send to the yard at once for Jameson's release. He is an honest man with clumsy pockets. The sovereigns will prove to be from Leith, as he said. The tradesman will have misremembered his impatience, as such men do. Let the butler lay your supper silver tomorrow morning and forgive him for laying it a degree too straight." Sir Lionel's hand tightened upon his. "Mr. Holmes, you restore more than jewels," he said simply. "Jewels have the advantage that they can be weighed," Holmes returned. "Justice has to be inferred. It is harder." We went out into the fog that had grown finer and more insinuating toward midnight, the lamps making yellow islands upon which the mist lapped with tender malice. In the hansom, Holmes sat very still, his profile a cut geometry against the light-flecked dark. He carried upon his knee a thin portfolio in which lay samples of Vale's paper and the gutta percha stamp. When I spoke of rest, he stirred as a man recalled from a dream. "Rest is for conclusions," he said. "We are in the middle clause. The author of these letters is in custody, but the letters will not yet know it." "You think he has written in advance?" "I think he has become enamoured of his own prose," Holmes said, a faint distaste curling the words. "Such men prepare their echoes also." Here the smallest of smiles. "You forget that one letter today came to us not by the Bevington route, but to our hearth and before the hour. He has a way to our table. He knew our vanity would bring us to his stage." "Then you expect?" "A sequel," he said. "We will read it where he intends us to read it." Mrs. Hudson, excellent woman, had kept the fire and a cutlet for me which, in my fatigue, I accepted as if it were a feast. Holmes ate nothing. He drew from his chemicals a small dish and set, with that reverent exactness of his, a grain of the salt from one of the flaps upon a drop that frothed and settled. He nodded when it yellowed. "See and pickle," he murmured. He lit his pipe, not to smoke, but to occupy his fingers, and took from the portfolio a strip of the Kendal paper. "Sit, Watson," he said, and there was something almost playful in the command, as if he were proposing a trick at the club. "We will answer a ghost with a ghost." He wrote, not in his own long spare hand, but with a stubby pen and a ruthlessness that made his letters put on a different character altogether, the soldier's exactness without its vigour, the clerk's neatness without his servility, a composite of what Vale would admire and suspect in the same instant. He laid the paper upon the patch of blue delft to scent it over the coal. He touched the flap with brine so that when dried, a crescent should glitter. Then he sealed it, not with any impression. Vale's trick had been the absence of wax, but with the cleanness of haste. He addressed it to himself with a faint, wry amusement, then drew out our own letterbox's inner plate and slipped the envelope between wooden throat and brass, not so far as to fall, but just to lodge where a hand, thrust from without, could find it. "He will come to correct me," Holmes said softly. "He will not bear that I use his signature to rebuke his theology. He will be drawn as surely as his little sledge." "Holmes," I protested, "you are providing him opportunity." "For what?" Holmes returned. "To make a fool of me upon my own hearth. We can afford to be made fools for half an hour if we gain a mind for a lifetime." He leaned back, long fingers steepled, the smoke from his untouched pipe winding up like a question mark. We did not wait long. The fog had the patience of bankruptcy. It sat and thinned and gathered itself, and far below, once we heard the solitary step of a constable and his cough. Then, so soft that Mrs. Hudson's clock behind the parlour door all but masked it, came the whisper at our own slit, the minute click of a spring reconsidered, the faint yielding of a card met by another card. Holmes did not move his head. His eyes went to the mantel mirror, where at that particular hour, and with that lamp placed so, one can, by a trick of optics, see the reflection of a hand raised at the letterbox without being oneself seen from the landing. A hand was there, gloved in dark kid, the fingers deft and impulsive. They entered, sought, hesitated upon the lodged envelope that was neither in nor out, and drew it. Holmes's hand, already on the knob, turned, the door opened with a swiftness that yet made no sound, and in the passage the man who had hoped to correct his own forgery found himself between Holmes's height and Mrs. Hudson's solidity. He was not Vale. That would have been too simple for Holmes's foreboding. He was a small man in a shabby overcoat with the collar turned up, his hat pushed back to free his eyes. Those eyes were keen and ill-tempered, full of the obstinacy that belongs to conscientious second-rate minds. His pockets, I observed, bulged with flat things rather than coin. His right thumb bore the black crescent that comes of indelible ink. He smelt not of peat, but of printer's size. Holmes did not lay hands upon him at once. He stood aside, as if to allow a guest to pass. "Good evening, Mr. Brace," he said. "You have the goodness to keep late hours for your compositor." The little man's eyelids flickered. It was enough. "I don't know you," he said, the resentment in him already shaping itself into grievance. "I came for a letter misdelivered." "You came for half your gospel," Holmes returned. "Your master is taken, and his sermon disturbed. The remainder of his epistles lay where they were to be fetched. You carry his habit as faithfully as his type, the Kendal stock, cut to size, the brine, the gutta-percha toy. You are the art that underpins his art, the man who sets lines for men who think they write. The compositors of Fleet Street have a pride almost as jealous as musicians. You will not shame a good one without waking his vanity." Brace's look hardened into a sort of shabby defiance. "If there's a job to be done and paid for, I do it," he said. "Mr. Vale, he brought copy and paper and a guinea. If there's scent on the stock, it's the stock's fault, not mine." If there's a dead man's name on it, I never met him. And yet you thought to amend my poor imitation, Holmes said. You have a conscience for the elegant. He took the letter from Brace's hand, opened it, and showed the line he had written within, now corrected in pencil with neat symbols of the compositor's trade, the movement of a comma, the shaving of a stroke, the notation for a change of leading. A compositor's pride, he added, as if he had been pleased. And in truth he was pleased. The world was behaving as he expected. Brace's quickness sought a path. If there's wrong afoot, I came to spare you the worst of it, he said, with the air of a man who sees a way to be virtuous without loss. Mr. Vale, he was taken, you say, but there's a proof to be pulled yet. There was to be a last letter. I have it. He checked himself too late. His hand went to his inner pocket. Holmes shook his head once. We will share the reading, he said, and, seeing that the choice now lay between dignity and custody, Brace produced the envelope and set it upon our table, as if he could thus transfer responsibility to the furniture. Holmes did not touch it until he had looked, as he always does, at the flanks of a matter. He went to the door, called down to Mrs. Hudson to ask the constable to step in from the corner. The faithful woman, who had been a bulk behind the door, and would, I am satisfied, have thrown her own tartan over the man had he fled, vanished with alacrity. Only when the yard's tread sounded on the stair did Holmes tear the flap along the fold. The hand was Vale's Addington, cruelly firm, parsimonious with its loops. Mr. Holmes, you think to educate me by showing that locks are mastered by habits. You forget that men are mastered by reputations. You will let your inspector loose a butler tonight and call it mercy. Tomorrow he will be rearrested by proof, not noise. The paste will be found in his pantry. He is the one most at hand. C.P. Addington, I cried out involuntarily. Holmes, Lestrade has not yet sent. He sent, Holmes said. Sir Lionel is a prompt man when honour pricks him. He turned to the constable who had entered. Your name? Turner, sir. Go at once to the yard, Holmes said, with that crisp authority that brooks no yard-room delay. Find Inspector Lestrade. Tell him from me to set a man, 2 men, upon the butler's pantry, and to lift every jar and sugar canister and loaf-box before the dawn. He is to expect a visit from Paste in a place where paste is proper. He glanced at Brace. And you, Mr. Brace, will oblige us with the name of the lad who carries proofs where gentlemen will not. If you refuse, I shall have to disagree with your estimate of my address books. Brace gave the name with a speed that had its own sort of honour. He had more loyalty to his craft than to the errand boy. Holmes nodded and sent Turner with both errands, then returned to the letter as a chess player returns to a position after a telling move. One most at hand, he repeated softly. He will not relinquish the phrase. He loves it because he thinks it bites both ways. At the innocent, nearest the jewel, and at the intellect, nearest me. He looked up at me then, and there was a weariness that was not physical in his face. There is an ugliness in vanity when it sets itself to be Providence. We will not let it sit that high. What do you require of me? I asked. To sit, he said, with a faint return of his earlier playfulness, and to do nothing illogical. I shall write twice more before dawn, once to the inspector, once to Sir Lionel. Between them they will save Jameson from a generosity that would send him back to jail in gratitude. And then, my dear fellow, we will sleep an hour and rise to see where our friend proposes to place his paste. He will choose at once a too obvious place and one so dully proper that only a butler would think to leave it. Fancy the sugar, he smiled thinly. A thief who has smelt of vinegar all night will not resist the domestic poetry of sugar. He sat then and wrote with the speed and exactitude of a man whose mind goes ahead of his pen like a pilot boat. Brace, watched by Mrs. Hudson and the constable, stood with the softness of a tradesman in a parlour, the indignation in him fighting uneasily with the relief that his part was now to be defined by other men. When Holmes had sent the notes by Turner and settled his pipe again where it never lit, he leaned back and closed his eyes. I thought him asleep. He was reckoning, I know now, the minutes it takes for a man's malice to find a door and a jar to find a shelf. Toward the thin hour that is neither night nor morning, the fog pressed closer, and the street's single lamplighter, finishing his useless round, went by with the quiet of those whose work persuades no one and comforts everyone. Holmes opened his eyes. "Now," he said, "if our correspondent keeps the sacrament he has devised, the paste will go to confession before breakfast. And we," he added, with that sudden flaring energy that is like a match to tinder, "we will be at the pantry when it does." We set out before the lamps were snuffed, the fog fine down to a silver dust that the first pale of morning could hardly trouble. Lestrade met us at the Mews with that mixture of suspicion and relief we had learned to expect when our paths were in step. Sir Lionel had been wakened by Holmes's note and made no protest at the invasion of his lower quarters. Jameson had been sent for from the yard at once, and, this was Holmes's stipulation, was to approach the house by the front and report himself to Sir Lionel, not to set foot in his pantry until Holmes gave the word. The butler's pantry is a shrine to a certain English cult, order. We stood in that narrow, polished sanctum, oak drawers like organ stops, a dresser of glass that held the reflections of the family's life, the silver cupboard with its breath of ammonia and pride. Beyond lay the knife cleaner, the plate warmers, and the two caddies that are a butler's unconfessed treasure, tea and sugar. Holmes's eye passed over the room once and then began to lay his small, silent snares. He took from his pocket a quill, split fine, and drew the thinnest line of lamp black across the join of the sugar canister's lid and body, no more than a breath of dark, the colour of early dust. A hair plucked from his own head, with a rueful smile, he laid bridging the hinge so that any lift would part it. To the floor before the shelf he sifted the tiniest veil of flour, the faintest whiteness where the boards already wore pale from years of feet. Then with his finger he made upon it two doubtless harmless marks that yet would tell us the tale of a foot placed and removed. Lastly, he touched the knob of the pantry door with a film of French chalk and held up his fingers to the lamplight until he was satisfied the chalk would remain invisible and indisputable. "Proof for men who prefer furniture to inference," he said, and his smile, for once, had no edge. Now we waited in the sculleries dim, by the deep sinks and the smell of last night's soap. Lestrade placed his man Turner by the tradesman's door, with orders to admit no one and nothing without a glance from Holmes. The scullery maid, brought sleepy and anxious by Mrs. Holt's summons, was set to peeling potatoes in the outer kitchen. Holmes had insisted upon her work going on. "Routines are snares and protections," he had said. "To cut them is to give a criminal a hint or a hero a taste for drama." The first sound came as a papery tap at the trade's door, too soft for a delivery boy who values his fee, too insinuating for the baker. Turner opened to a lad with a cap pulled low and a parcel in brown. "For the cook," he mumbled. "Yeast," Mrs. said. He would have pushed past the constable as water seeks a crack, but Turner's big hand sat upon his shoulder while Holmes drifted forward with an air of absent curiosity that has bewildered so many men into truth. "Let us admire Mrs. Holt's thrift," he said, and took the parcel. It was labelled in a fair shop hand, compressed yeast, with a slip of printed billhead pasted beneath, Marshall and Sons, Chadwell Street, and a penny stamp crooked upon the fold. Holmes did not break the string. He smelled the paste under the label and the faint tang of gum in the stamp's back, then lifted one corner with a fingernail that had more skill than many a penknife. A slip lay within the wrapper that should have been paper only. It was no larger than a playing card, a little tin of jeweller's cement, not yet opened. Beside it, a pellet of rouge wrapped in vellum that bore, if one peered closely, the ghost of the Kendal trout. Holmes closed the parcel again and nodded to Turner. "The lad will carry our compliments to Mr. Brace," he said dryly. "Tell him the yeast rose at the wrong altar." The boy, caught between the desire to bolt and the instinct to appease a gentleman, took his escape with an oath meant for the street and was gone like a hare. Turner pursued far enough to know where he turned. It would serve for later. Holmes, already at the pantry door, regarded the untouched chalk upon the knob and the intact hair along the hinge of the sugar canister with a serenity that was almost tender. "One stream damned," he murmured. "Listen for the rill." The rill, when it came, was not at the trade's door at all, but from the corridor beyond, light firm steps and the known clack of keys. Mrs. Holt entered with a lamp and the expression of a woman whose conscience is about to be gratified. She saw us and halted, then, as rank arranged itself within her, she curtsied to Sir Lionel's house, as embodied in me and Lestrade, cast a nod that might have been prayer to propriety, and came on. "Mrs. Holt," Holmes said gently, "at what hour do you examine the butler's store?" "First thing," she replied, with the firmness of a creed. "There'll be standing pie to carve for luncheon, and I'll not have waste. And today," Holmes continued, "you come earlier by 10 minutes, and you carry, in your left apron pocket, a sheet of vellum that has spent a moment upon brine." She stiffened, the colour rose along the edges of her cap. "Mr. Holmes," she said with wounded dignity, "you affront me." "I defend you," he returned, in a tone that made her blush, fight with her anger. "The affront is here." He bowed slightly toward her pocket. "You have been written to, Mrs. Holt. You are to be shown where the butler hid his paste. So you may be first upon the field to claim virtue for detecting it." She wavered. Pride, duty, the pleasure of a discovery, all wrestled upon her honest face. At last she drew out the vellum and placed it on the dresser without looking at it. I saw the leaping trout in the light. Holmes broke it by sliding his nail along the fold. The line was brief. The hand, the precise soldier's mimic, we now knew too well. "Mrs. Holt, you alone have eyes in that house. If you will look into the butler's sugar, you will find what I could not speak. Ring for the police at once. A friend, 2 honest houses." She read it once and shut her lips hard. "Sir," she said, "I am no fool, and yet I would have been one. I do not love Jameson. He is stiff as February, but I'll not be made a show for any friend that writes like a colonel." Holmes's face softened. "You are the house," he said, simply. "No one knows it better. Look then at what you would have found had you been a minute earlier, before we stopped the yeast boy." He opened the parcel and set the tin and rouge down upon the dresser. Mrs. Holt's anger twisted into something like sorrow. "To put that in a gentleman's sugar," she breathed. "It would cake in 5 minutes and never be missed until it made itself plain to a fool with a warrant. Oh, shame!" Holmes turned the pantry knob with a kerchief about his hand and held the knob sideways into the lamplight. The French chalk took the angle and showed no smear but his own cloths. He stooped, and with a breath That barely disturbed the flower, indicated the 2 small marks he had made. They lay unbroken, the whiteness between them smooth as neglect. Lastly, he showed the hair upon the hinge, still bridging. The 3 proofs made a tidy sermon. Mrs. Holt could not resist. Her keys rattled with more comfort now, and her look at me had in it something like gratitude for keeping her from folly. "Close this room," Holmes said to Lestrade. "Let Jameson stand at his own door and not touch so much as a spoon. Inspector, send a man to Mr. Brace. Bring him to the yard with his boy. He will find candour a better trade than errantry by noon." It was done with that discipline that, in crises, makes a great house the equal of a regiment. Jameson came by the front as instructed, pale with the exhaustion and humiliation of a night improperly spent, but he carried his rectitude like a visiting card. He bowed to Holmes and to Mrs. Holt. "If I may take orders," he began. "You may take breakfast and sleep," said Mrs. Holt, who had recovered her captaincy. "I will not have you lay fork or foot in this place till Mr. Holmes says so." It was her apology, and Jameson, who understood the language of households as a sailor understands weather, accepted it with a tired dignity that did all parties credit. Holmes's attention had already turned to a smaller thing. He lifted from the dresser a sugar scoop and looked along its edge, then smelled it. "Faint gum," he said, almost to himself. "Not from today's packet, older." Our correspondent rehearsed his morality upon wood. He practiced the act of finding before the day of planting. That is useful knowledge. It tells us he has stood where we stand and that he thought he could make virtue into a net. "Will he concede the game?" I asked. "Nay, vanity concedes nothing. It only changes epigraphs," Holmes replied. "He has lost his hand and his rope. He must now prove to himself that he has not lost his wit. He will write, or has written, the last of his theology." Sir Lionel entered then, orderly even in fatigue. "There is a man below from Inspector Lestrade," he said. "A compositor has been found with proofs of letters not yet sent. He is at the yard, and this," he held out an envelope, "was at my hall when the door was opened for the milk. It bears no stamp." Holmes took it and smiled without any joy. "Our ghost cannot resist a good entrance. Come, Watson, we will receive his benediction in the morning room in the place of his miracles." We went there with Sir Lionel and Mrs. Holt. The room had that indecent purity rooms have at dawn, every surface confessed by the day. Holmes tore the flap along the fold, the salt on it winked once in the light, and read. He pitched his voice so that we all heard, and yet it seemed the letter spoke directly into my own ear. "Mr. Holmes, this finishes it. You may arrest the poor creatures whose hands you can take. You cannot arrest any idea. The house is corrupted by habit. The innocent will be at your elbow until you learn to hate convenience. C.P. Addington." Holmes turned the paper over and tapped, not the script, but the edges. "He is at last reduced to aphorisms," he said, contempt tempered by something like sadness. "When a man's contrivances fail, he falls in love with sentences." Mrs. Holt gave a small, fierce sniff. "I'll show him convenience," she said, and went out to set the bell for breakfast with a vigour that would, I am convinced, have defeated a smaller criminal on its own. Holmes remained a moment, looking not at the letter now, but out at the square where the fog was lifting into strips like gauze pulled from a bandage. "We shall go to the yard," he said presently. "There is a last tightening to be done while our fish still believes himself in the stream. Then we will return to Baker Street and let him come, and he will come, to congratulate himself upon having eluded us by becoming a principal." "You will bait him," I said. "I will ask him to tea," he replied, with that sudden lightness that in him is the herald of exact calculation. And I will give him for sugar a truth he will not stomach. Come, Watson, our morning has begun. At the yard, Holmes's requests were executed with that rare mixture of zeal and reluctance the police reserve for him. Brace, when faced with the errand boy and the little tin of cement, gave his tale with the fatal pride of accuracy. He named the hours he had set Vale's copy, the packets he had gummed, the 2 envelopes he had been told to deliver to the gentleman in Baker Street when called for. One, he admitted, he had already reclaimed from our slip. The other, for the morning, lay in his waistcoat when we met him. He had never seen Mr. Wetherall. He had taken money twice from Mr. Lecky for extras, and once, here, his eye ventured a sideways defiance from a gentleman in travel clothes with a cavalry scar who had corrected his punctuation as if commanding troops. "Colonel's manners," he said sourly, "knew too much about commas." Holmes's eyelids drooped. He could be as merciless to a figure as to a fact. "The comma," he murmured, "is the most arrogant of pauses. Thank you, Mr. Brace. You shall have your guinea from the Crown instead of from a pamphleteer. Take care not to boast of it in your club." When we were again in the cab, he let the window down an inch. The mist fingered his cheek. His mind, I could tell, had already passed beyond Brace. "You mark the scar," he said. "You remember, too, our Colonel Seagrave. A jaw mended abroad, the reserve of a man who was once second and dreams of being first, boots that have felt foreign dust, and a habit of language that trembles on the edge of epigram. He stood last night apart and disdainful, as if the house were a game not well played. You think him the author, the idea?" "That hired Vale and Wetherall?" "I think the idea borrowed a soldier's discipline the way it borrowed a soldier's hand," Holmes returned. "There is a connection with Addington that is not merely handwriting. Seagrave served within the same brigade. He wintered in Madeira 2 seasons past. He may have kept the dead man's letters as a field relic. He brought the smell of sea pantries into a London parlour. He is vain enough to prefer an allegory to a theft, and poor enough, judging by the polish turned on his cuffs, to take a profit if it offered itself disguised as a philosophy." "And you will ask him to tea," I said. "I will ask him for advice." Holmes smiled. "Men who think themselves ideas cannot resist being consulted." We had scarce been 10 minutes at Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson, heaven bless her solid soul, had set the tray as if it were a sacrament, when a card was brought up. Colonel Hector Seagrave, the crest upon it, an oval with crossed lances and a motto in Latin common to that regiment, had the precise dimensions of the ghosted seal we had seen upon the first of the vellum envelopes. Holmes took it between finger and thumb as a naturalist takes a beetle and turned it to the light. "Oval within oval," he said, and the faintest of saturnine lights warmed his eye. "Ask the colonel up." Seagrave entered with the composure of a man who arrives to find the room prepared to respect him. He was spare, slightly stooped from old wounds rather than years, and his jaw bore that neat seam I had noted at the party. He accepted tea with a soldier's politeness, neither gushing nor curt, and took the sugar with the unconscious caution of a campaigner who has been to countries where one counts one's spoons. "You sent for me, Mr. Holmes," he said when Mrs. Hudson had gone. "I confess I am curious. I had supposed the yard equal to a butler." "The yard colonel is equal to a great many things one day late," Holmes returned pleasantly. "I sent for you because you are a man of method, and I have a question of method that amuses me. The letters in the Bevington affair, their handwriting, their scent, their peculiar tricks of flattery and rebuke, what should one conclude as to their author's discipline? A clerk? A scholar? A soldier? Seagrave's glance was swift and cool. "A soldier would not meddle with women's trinkets," he said. "He has seen too many men bleed over iron." "Gertrude Stein could not have said it better," Holmes murmured, and his smile showed he had meant the misquotation to prick. "Yet the vocabulary is military, pledges, duty, the innocent being at one's elbow like a junior officer. The sentences pretend to strategy." "Anyone can ape a parade," Seagrave said, and there was the tiniest tightening of his scar when he smiled. "As for scent, London is full of men who have been to sea and prefer their tooth powder strong." Holmes's fingers idled upon the sugar tongs. "And watermarks. There is Kendal to be bought near any railway." "Indeed," Seagrave agreed. "I have a sheaf at my rooms for my own correspondence." "Do you so?" Holmes said, and if his tone altered by a shade, I, who know him, heard it. He leaned his elbow on the mantel and idly turned the Colonel's card upon the shelf. "Your ring carries your crest, Colonel." He lifted his hand. The ring sat upon the little finger, an oval signet, the lances and motto sunk delicately in carnelian. Holmes, with that insolent gentleness which is his own, held our envelope, the first with the ghosted seal, near it, measuring the oval to oval. The fit was as close as shadow to object. "Pretty," he said softly. "You pressed the flap with your ring when the wax was a fancy your compositor could not supply." Seagrave set his cup down. "Are you accusing me, Mr. Holmes?" "I am inviting you to relieve yourself of an idea," Holmes returned. "I do not think you pasted stones. You would consider such an errand beneath a uniform, but I think you suggested to Mr. Vale the epigraphs and lent him Colonel Addington's hand. I think you gave Wetherall to understand that the house would be the better for tidying its wires. I think you paid a compositor once because the sentence did not sit as you wished it to sit, and I think you came to Baker Street when you learned that a game you had devised to make clever men into puppets had escaped its strings." The soldier's eyes did not change. It was the jaw that told a fractional hardening as if his surgeon's stitch drew. "And what," he asked evenly, "is my prize in this melodrama?" "The old prize," Holmes said, "of making a gentleman foolish in his own house. Sir Lionel is the sort of man whose conscience irritates you. He cannot see that virtues become vices when arranged like plate. You intended to show him that the world runs by convenience, not by principle. A butler is always at hand, therefore a butler is guilty until a hand like yours writes otherwise. It pleased you to prove it." Seagrave's fingers, which had been beautifully still, toyed once with his teaspoon. "You give me a doctrine I should like to own," he said, and his candour had in it something almost droll, but which I did not take the trouble to invent. "Mr. Vale brought me an amusement. I dressed it." "Precisely," Holmes returned. "Dressing is precisely what soldiers do to thoughts. You trimmed it to your creed, that reputation moves men more surely than locks. You hoped the house would become a theatre in which your contempt for it could take bows. You forgot that theatres have carpenters. They exposed your wires." Seagrave rose. He was not taller than Holmes, but there was about him the authority of the field. "If this be your case," he said, "send for your inspector. Do not call me gentleman, and then tell your landlady to bar the door." Holmes's eyes, half closed, then opened, with that queer, bright kindliness he shows to brave rogues. "Inspector Lestrade," he said, and the door that had been ajar widened another inch. Lestrade stepped in with that careful humility he keeps for prey not yet secured. "You will attend a moment," Holmes added, "until I have finished serving the tea." Seagrave's lip moved. Perhaps the absurdity of it wounded him more than the accusation. Holmes took not the sugar, but a small oblong from the mantel, a rectangle of Kendal vellum from which a piece had been torn. He set beside it, on the tray, a companion piece from his portfolio, a scrap preserved from the wallet of the letterbox thief we had taken at the railings. "You will indulge me one carpenter's proof," he said. "The edges of torn vellum mate like bones. This piece," he touched the tray, "was upon your man's person. This other," he looked levelly at Seagrove, "I found under the lining of your visiting card case when Mrs. Hudson brought up your tea. You will recognize the case. You placed it upon the mantel when you entered. The decal agrees." He moved the scraps together. The little fronds of fibre met and kissed like parted hair. Seagrave looked at it as one looks at a shell in which the sea still talks. He laughed. I had not expected that sound. It was low, genuine, irritated only by its own helplessness. "You practice pretty toys, Mr. Holmes." "I match habits," Holmes said. "The habit that pressed a ring into damp paper is the same that keeps scraps in a card case to be useful later. The habit that likes neat sentences is the one that cannot resist correcting a compositor. The habit that stinks of peat when there is no hearth for it in London is the pride of a man who must carry his weather with him." Seagrave glanced at Lestrade, judged his distance, and let the last of his stiffness drop like a cloak. "Very well," he said. "I did not steal a lady's trinkets. I encouraged a cousin to teach a house the value of attention. The rest is your embroidery." "And the reward?" Holmes asked softly. Seagrave's eyes went past us to the fire. "I thought to ruin a kind of piety," he said, the words flat with an old bitterness. "I grow very tired of houses where servants are furniture until misfortune wants a figure to blame. I have seen men hanged between breakfast and luncheon to quiet a drawing-room. Addington," the name came out harsher than he had meant it. He had a creed of duty that put glass before flesh. He left a dozen letters praising wives' economies and never wrote a line on the price men paid to bring them beef. I wanted a ghost to make a sound those wives would hear. Vale made the ghost. I gave it a sword." Holmes's face altered very slightly, and I, who have seen him in the company of both saint and swindler, knew that a corner of him conceded the man's grievance even as the rest closed like a trap. "You gave it a sword," he repeated, "and we disarmed it. Lestrade?" The inspector came forward, cuffs ready. Seagrave did not resist. He had had, one felt, the satisfaction of his statement. As Lestrade turned him to the door, he paused by the tray and, with a soldier's impulse toward tidy trifles, set his cup neatly upon its saucer. He looked at Holmes. "You have your butler," he said. "You have your girl. I hope you will keep them. Houses will be better for it." "Houses are what we make with the hands we have," Holmes returned. "It is not their doctrine that saves them, it is their mercy to those at hand." He bowed, truly bowed, to the soldier. "I am sorry for what made you clever, Colonel. I am not sorry I stopped you." When they were gone, the room seemed larger. Holmes stood a moment with his head bent. The signet ring's shadow lay oval upon the table. He took up the scraps of vellum and placed them in the folio with a rigour that looked like tenderness. "You will write this, Watson," he said at last. "If you permit," I answered. "Do so without my paragraph about sentences," he added, and the old half-mocking self-command returned. "It is unkind to prose, and prose has done me no great harm." I could not forbear a laugh. "You will suffer one last question. The first letter this morning, the one to our own rooms. How did he place it, without stirring Mrs. Hudson or the dust?" "By coming when dust pretends to be air," Holmes said. 6:30, when the milk clinks and the stairs are empty of dread. He has the trick of all men who are obeyed too often. He trusts that doors open. It is why he knocked. There followed a silence into which the day inserted itself with grace. The street woke. A cart rattled. Somewhere a sparrow reminded London that even fog has a top. Holmes poured himself at last a cup he would drink. He took no sugar. "And now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "I shall go see whether Lestrade has put the right name in the right column, and then I shall play a very slow sarabande as a courtesy to a man who thought himself an aria." He glanced at the blue Delft jar where our tobacco lay. "You may tell the story as you please, my dear fellow. Only permit me one stipulation." "And that?" "Let the letters keep their scent," he said. "Readers trust their noses more than their heads. It will please our ghost to know that in the end he perfumed only the truth." The fog had thinned to a pale gold when Holmes set aside his violin and leaned against the window, his reflection a darker ghost among the drifting light. The instrument still sang faintly from his last bow, a slow and mournful sarabande whose measured rhythm seemed to bring a final order to the chaos we had lived through. He spoke without turning. "Do you observe, Watson, how the city cleanses itself with every dawn? It forgets its night with the arrogance of youth. Crime, deceit, redemption, all are washed from its pavements before breakfast." I looked at him and saw that rarest of things, a quiet in his eyes. "And yet," I said, "some stains remain invisible even to light." He smiled a little. "Invisible, perhaps, but never untraced." A knock came. Lestrade entered, hat in hand, the weariness of duty softened by satisfaction. "It's done," he said. "Seagrave's made a statement, more philosophy than confession, but enough for the Crown. Vale and Wetherall will follow. Brace has turned evidence. The compositor's pride saves him a noose." He hesitated, then added, almost sheepishly, "The Bevingtons sent word. They're grateful, though the papers will make a circus of it." Holmes waved the concern away. "The public is fond of ghosts, Inspector. Let them haunt a newspaper column for a week and vanish. It keeps their nerves from troubling Parliament." Lestrade managed a dry chuckle, thanked him stiffly and took his leave. Holmes watched him descend the stairs, then turned to me. "It is curious, Watson. The Colonel began his scheme to humiliate vanity, yet it was vanity that betrayed him. His letters from the afterlife were meant to teach others the futility of belief. And yet he believed, most devoutly, in his own cleverness. Every criminal, at heart, worships his reflection. I thought of Seagrave's last words, the bitter sermon of a man too intelligent to be happy and too proud to be forgiven. "You pitied him," I said, quietly. "For his intellect, yes," Holmes admitted. "But intellect without mercy is only geometry. He saw patterns where there should have been people. That is always the first step toward ruin." He went to the mantel, where the surviving letters lay bound together by twine, and held one to the light. The salt upon its flap sparkled faintly, the scent of sea and brine lingering as if from another world. "Our phantom," he said, "did not lie entirely. Addington's name, stolen though it was, served a purpose. The Colonel revived a ghost to prove that order itself was a superstition, and in so doing he proved the opposite. The letters, the wires, the perfect mechanisms, all demanded precision, habit, obedience to rule. Even rebellion depends upon law." He dropped the envelope back among its fellows and brushed the salt from his fingers. "There, Watson, lies the comfort of logic. The world may blunder into folly, but it must blunder according to its own design." I found myself studying him, as I often did, in the quieter aftermaths of our cases, the strange blend of severity and compassion that governed his nature. And what of the innocent Holmes, Jameson, the girl Annie? What becomes of them now that their names are cleared? He looked genuinely pleased by the question. The Bevingtons have restored them both. Sir Lionel has offered the butler a rise, and Lady Bevington means to make the girl her maid-in-waiting. Mrs. Holt, I suspect, will keep the pantry key on her person until Judgment Day. So you see, even a deception, properly exposed, can renew honesty. It is the one miracle I allow myself to believe. He turned again to the window. Below, London stirred into its waking industry, the first carts rolling, milk boys whistling, and somewhere a bell marking 8. Our ghost is gone, Watson, but his lesson remains. The world does not suffer from too many mysteries, it suffers from too few minds willing to follow them to their cause. Men read shadows and call them revelations. We, at least, may continue to chase the lantern that casts them. He drew a long breath, the kind that signals both release and the restlessness that would soon summon another adventure. I think, he said lightly, that I shall write to my brother Mycroft. He detests philosophy almost as much as crime. It will amuse him to see how the two can be made one and the same. I could not help laughing. And I said, shall write my account of the affair. There is something instructive in it, Holmes, a lesson on how vanity cloaks itself in intellect, and how even the cleverest schemes dissolve before an honest mind. He raised an eyebrow. Just so long as you do not entitle it Letters from the Afterlife, the Strand would mistake it for fiction, and I am not prepared to compete with my own obituary. With that dry remark, he reached for his pipe and the violin once more. The bow traced a few idle notes, low, searching, almost tender, and I felt the room settle into that rare peace which followed every storm he conjured. Outside, the fog had burned away entirely. The sky was clear above Baker Street, and for a moment the sunlight touched the corner of the desk, where the letters lay, turning their faded vellum to gold. Holmes did not look up from his music when he said, half to himself, "It is a singular thing, Watson. The dead may send no letters, but their handwriting, if forged with enough conviction, can still alter the living." And with that final phrase he drew his bow across the strings, a single long note that trembled and fell into silence, leaving only the steady heartbeat of London beyond the window. So ended the case of the Letters from the Afterlife, and I, who had seen Holmes untangle crimes of passion and empire alike, could not shake the feeling that this one, born from intellect alone, had shown the most dangerous passion of all, the passion for mastery itself. I left him there amid the morning light, the violin in his hands, and thought that no ghost, however cunning, would ever truly haunt 221B so long as Sherlock Holmes lived to interpret its handwriting.